So yeah, thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. Saba, you recommend making someone else co-host. This is a good idea because sometimes my internet connection is a bit weak. I'd be taking the liberty of making Pekka the co-host. Is that okay?
It is, at least by me. I don't know. Is it okay by Saba?
Oh yes, this is you are running the show. Both of you are all running the show.
Okay, thanks. So we can.
Great. So yeah, again, let's start. Thank you very much for coming. This is to commemorate Raimo Tuomela's life and work. And as all of you know, he has passed away on November 22nd, 2020, at the age of 80. He passed away quite unexpectedly. And many of us, of course, got into contact and talked to each other this evening when we heard it. And there's one label that stuck to my mind, and I think, if I recall correctly, Frank Hendricks had this expression for whom we have lost, and that's the spiritus rector of current social ontology. And it's a spiritus rector, guiding spirit, guiding figure, not only in the sense that he has developed a toolbox of conceptual tools to investigate into social phenomena in a new way, in a very, very promising way. It's also, and we're going to hear about this a lot, and I'm very grateful for those who have agreed to join this symposium and to contribute to it. But it's also spiritus rector in organizational terms. And even though I did my reading of Raimo's work and I profited immensely from reading his work, it is in that second role that I was most tightly connected personally with Raimo, the setting up of the organization. You know, this was ISO's founding president, and even a bit more, it was the person who had the idea and who pursued the idea of not just developing conceptual tools and whole landscapes of conceptual tools, really, but to find ways for scholars to get together and to pursue the study of the basics of the social world in a new way. He pushed and promoted the organization of the collective intentionality conferences. It was him who sort of saw to it. It was him who recognized that this was a topic for more than just a one-time conference, but that there are debates developing also in other, not just in philosophy, but also in neighboring disciplines, in economics, for example, in the early years. He recognized that, and he recognized that some organization is needed here. Also, he is the spiritus rector behind the foundation of ENSO, the European Network of Social Ontology, that sort of switched gears with the Colint conferences. Also, he promoted quite forcefully and was instrumental in the foundation of ISOS. He supported very vigorously the foundation of the Journal of Social Ontology, and of course he edited basically the first book series in the field, the Philosophy of Sociality book series. So it's not just the scholar, it's also the, how shall I put it? Well, I think spiritus rector is just the right term, that that Frank Hendricks has coined for whom we have lost. And I think commemorating Raimo and honoring his life and his work not only serves the purpose of sort of showing gratitude, but it's also instrumental, I think, for us, the social ontologists coming together to understand where we come from and basically understand important dimensions about who we are. So I'm extremely grateful to Saba for making this possible, this symposium in memoriam Raimo Tuomela. And it was, of course, a difficult task to put this together, because we could have invited most everyone working in social ontology, because most everyone has something to say, or maybe also some gratitude to show Raimo Tuomela, or was engaged in a controversy with Raimo. So this is such a central figure that commemorating him basically involves everyone. But especially given this global impact, I decided that I'm going to put Helsinki people exclusively on the panel, because Raimo had this unique ability of gathering excellent philosophers around him. And when we say Raimo, sometimes what we mean is more than just Raimo. And I felt it is fitting, especially for this conference that's hosted in San Diego, that we should get to know Raimo's closest collaborators. And we are going to hear the first formal presentation will be by Mai Tuomela, his partner, I think alter ego, we could say alter ego, and his co-author. Then this is going to be followed by a joint presentation by Kaarlo Miller, Pekka Mäkelä, and Raul Hakli. You can see them sitting there jointly together in obviously Pekka's office, because it's Pekka's Zoom account. And then we're going to hear from Gabriel Sandu. And Gabriel is going to take us a bit further back. By the way, I can't see Gabriel here. Is he already here? I don't think he is. So he's also with the boys.
He's with us.
He's a famous.
We are all here holding hands.
Yeah, so Gabriel Sandu, who is a philosopher of logic and language and works with formal methods, but had an early acquaintance with Raimo. He knew Raimo when nobody else of us knew him, and he's going to take us a bit further back. If there is still time after all of that, I'm going to give a short presentation on Raimo as the organizer and the founding figure of ISOS. But I think the Helsinki people should have a say now. And before we start with the presentation, Kalle, Pekka, and Raul are going to introduce us to the life and work of Raimo Tuomela. So please, Kalle, Pekka, Raul, floor is yours.
Thank you, Bernhard, and good morning to those of you in the United States, and good evening to those of you in Europe. It's a sad honor to be here commemorating our dear colleague Raimo Tuomela. However, despite his international reputation that Bernhard already characterized, we thought that there may be some people in the audience who do not know Raimo, and certainly there are people in the audience who don't know us. So we prepared a brief introduction of Raimo, and then we give the floor to Mai. So we try to instantiate Raimo's Wii Mode theory in action by way of giving our talk jointly, both this beginning and the latter part. So this picture was chosen because one of the dearest memories for us of Raimo is our collaboration in Munich, and where we used to go to the Alps and hike with him. So we thought that this picture sort of is important to us, at least, and respects Raimo's memory, perhaps in a beautiful way. So what we're going to do, here's a bit of an outline. We are going to do it in two parts. First, we go through rather briefly Raimo's life and his career, and then Mai will give her talk, and then we come back to the part two of our presentation, in which we briefly discuss our personal collaborations with Raimo, also content-wise, and then we discuss a little how his work lives in the work of ours and perhaps some others, and then we're going to conclude. That will be the outline. But perhaps we just briefly introduce ourselves and then go and talk about Raimo. Maybe Kalle is the first to introduce himself, because Kalle was the person who collaborated with longer than any of us.
Yeah, I was Raimo's research assistant in the 80s when he was writing the book Science, Action and Reality. It was the Finnish version of it, and I had to read the proofs and comment, and as I was a young graduate student at that time, and that's how I learned to know him already in the 80s. And after me, Pekka learned to know.
I started collaborating with him in early 1990s. He was a supervisor of my master's thesis, and later on also one of the supervisors of my PhD thesis. And I also started working-wise with him as his research assistant. And at that time, he was working on the manuscript of The Importance of Us.
Yes, and I'm Raul Hakli, and I got to know Raimo in 1999. I had a couple of years earlier graduated. I did my master's thesis in computer science, but at that time I had realized that I'm really actually more interested in philosophy than computer science, and wanted to do a PhD in philosophy. So I was going in Gabriel Sandu's seminar, and he knew Raimo very well and said that I should contact him because Raimo was interested in applying his theories of social action to the field of distributed artificial intelligence and multi-agent systems, and wanted to have contact with computer scientists and people who have been in artificial intelligence. So I had a suitable background, and then I contacted him, and then gradually became a part of the group.
Okay, what we're going to say, it's going to, in part at least, it's going to repeat some of the stuff Bernhard already mentioned, but here we go.
Okay, I think Hans Bernhard said most of this. So he was one of the founders in Collective Intentionality, and I personally participated in the first Collective Intentionality meeting in Munich that he organized together with Wolfgang Balzer in 1999. There were some other people who kept on going in these conferences, like, if I recall correctly, Margaret Gilbert and James Miller, and from Germany, Georg Mäkelä, just to mention a few. And as Bernhard said, he was the president of ISIS at that time. Okay.
Yes, and he was a professor for a long time in the University of Helsinki. He was a professor of practical philosophy from 1971 until 2008 when he retired. He also had a permanent visiting professorship at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich since 2005. And he had 2 PhD degrees, one from 1968 from University of Helsinki and from 69 in Stanford University. And he received several significant awards for his research, the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation Research Award in 1992, and then the honor prize of Finnish Academy of Science and Letters in 2019, to mention the most important ones. And he was very productive. He published more than 200 scholarly publications and more than 10 monographs with good publishers and many articles in first-rate philosophy journals.
And maybe for us, it's very important to make people know how significant he was in Finland. Of course, Raimo was not a guy who made a lot of noise of himself, but we think that he can be seen as one of the great Finnish analytic philosophers in the continuum with Georg Henrik von Wright and Jaakko Hintikka, who are pretty well known all over the world, and Raimo sort of carries the torch after them.
I wonder if others are missing the connection as well.
This is unfortunate. Obviously, Pekka's Zoom is frozen. I just wrote this message, but just to make sure, I'm going to give him a call.
I don't know what happened.
Now Pekka is back.
I'm back, yes. Sorry about that. We were dropped somehow. I don't know how far did I get, but anyway, the point was that Raimo was extremely important for Finnish philosophy by way of creating the international relations that benefited many generations after him.
Okay, and here is a brief summary of the main philosophical interests that Raimo had in, and in that order that they appear on the slide. He was first interested in philosophy of science, and his book and his PhD and his book was about theoretical concepts in 1973. And also closely related to philosophy of science was when he wrote his book Science, Action and Reality. But originally he was a psychologist that not many people know, and he later turned into philosophy. And he was interested, and that might have led him to study human action and its explanation. And in 1977, he wrote a monograph with the title Human Action and its explanation. And the subtitle is very telling of him. He said that it's a study on the philosophical foundations of psychology. That he was still quite, and as he always was, trying to provide something for the empirical sciences as well. So that interest followed him throughout his career. And then from single agent action or individual action, he turned to social action. And in 1984, his monograph, The Theory of Social Action, is where he studied and where he introduced the first mention these three intentions. And gradually, in the meantime, he wrote many monographs, but he ended up in 2013 and was interested in social ontology. So that's a kind of succession of his interests, what we have here. Okay.
And here is just a list of his main monographs in English. So he started on the philosophy of science topics, writing on theoretical concepts and hypothetical inductive inference, then moved on to action theory, defending a version of the causal theory of action, then moved to social action, and here came this idea that these theories that he had developed for single agent action could also be applied to social action and even on analogic to group agents at some point. So that's when the collective intentionality ideas came there. And then later on, he continued with these collective intentionality books, writing theories about many topics. In his last few books, there are analysis of joint action, group action, social institutions, social practices, social norms, social roles, collective emotions, and many other things. So this, I guess, is the main contribution from which he is remembered in this community.
There's a book called The Importance of Us, and there's a bit of an anecdote about it. Henrik von Frick saw the book when it was published, and he told Raimo that he's positively surprised that he has broadened his scope to political philosophy because he read the title, The Importance of US. But that was not exactly Raimo's cup of tea after all. We thought that it might be an idea to say, or at least give this slide about Raimo's sort of philosophical outlook, perhaps because his kind of peculiar way of writing and doing analysis has caused many people in this community also gray hair, or at least some interpretational difficulties. And we think that, at least in part, to use an expression Raimo likes to use, the background of in philosophy of science sort of reflects on his way of doing philosophy, and also the philosophy of social ontology, in social ontology, because he thought that the final verdict of philosophical theory is given by the success of empirical theories that the philosophical theory sort of inspires. So he thought that his way of philosophizing was, so in a way, at least ideally, organically connected to empirical science. And this idea gets an expression in his book on social ontology in 2013 as well, which is quoted here. And then Raul.
Yes, well, we are in this community mostly interested in this collective intentionality and social ontology phenomenon. With collective intentionality, we mean intentional states and actions attributed to collectives or groups. So, for instance, collective beliefs, collective intentions, and so on. And social ontology is the study of the constituents and construction of social reality. And the collective intentionality approach to social ontology takes collective intentionality to be a central element in the construction of social the social world, and that's why this is important to us. So there is lots of discussion on what this collective intentionality is and what exactly is collective in this collective intentionality. And there's a rather standard distinction or division of different views in this, which is exemplified in particular in Hans-Bernhard Schmid and David Schweikardt's entry on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So what is collective in collective intentionality? Like, for instance, a collective intention. We intend to paint a house together. There are various views. There's a view that we could call eliminativism, saying that, well, there is not really anything irreducibly collective because everything can be understood in terms of individual intentional states, individual intentions with individual content. So in order for us to paint a house together, it's just enough that you paint this side and I paint that side, and there are certain intentions regarding each other's doings and so on, but that's pretty much it, and there is nothing irreducibly collective. Then there are these content accounts that, according to which we can understand collective intentional activity and collective intentions in terms of the standard beliefs, desires, and intentions of individual agents, but these intentions and beliefs and desires might have collective content, so they might be about some joint activities. And for instance, Michael Bradman's account, where he employs the concept of I intend that we, J, or we do something together. The J there is something like collective action. It's the collective element in this theory. And also Kirk Ludwig and Seamus Miller are representatives of this content type of accounts. Then there are these mode accounts, according to which it's not enough that there is something collective in the content of the intentional states, but rather the type of the attitude, or if we are talking about modes of intentionality, where this means the type of the intentional state, whether it's a belief or intention or desire or fear or whatever, you have to have a certain type of a collective mode, in the sense that in addition to individual intentions, there are something like we intentions, which somehow are of a different kind, and they are not reducible to these I intentions. So they take seriously this idea of a we intention, which is different from I intention. And Raimo Tuomela was, or is, understood to be a representative of these types of theories, along with John Searle. Then there is lots of discussion about these different things, but the most collectivistic or strongest accounts are these subject type of accounts, according to which we have to take seriously this attribution of intentional state to the we or the group. And you have to understand these attitudes in a strong way as attitudes of the group. So the group is really an existing entity, not only an entity, but also an agent. And groups, literally speaking, have these intentional states like beliefs and intentions and so on. And representatives of these types of accounts are Margaret Gilbert and Hans-Bernhard Schmid, and Philip Pettit probably should be counted in this camp as well. Then there is lots of discussion of whether this mode type of accounts are really needed, or whether they somehow perhaps should be understood as subject type of accounts, because they are, after all, talking about attributing intentional states to groups. But Raimo, for instance, was reluctant of saying that groups really are agents, or he was rather using this terminology that they are constructed and fictitious and all that. They are conceptually, functionally understood agents, but not in any stronger sense. And on the other hand, there are some who think that actually these mode accounts should be understood to be content type of accounts, that actually when analyzed, these we intentions can be analyzed in terms of the collective content, and it's not necessary to postulate a new type of, for instance, intention. Yes.
Why doesn't it move? No.
Okay, then there is another very important distinction. This is one thing that Raimo is very well known of. This is the distinction between I mode and we mode. And here we use again the word mode, but it should be understood that this is not the same mode as the mode in mode accounts, where you are talking about this mode of intentional state or mode of intentionality. So there we are talking about different types of intentional states. Here we are talking about a different way of thinking and acting. And Raimo thought that this I mode, we mode distinction, which is orthogonal to the other distinction that we talked earlier, is trying to track an intuitive difference between two ways of acting. There's a way of acting as a private person, doing my private things, having my own beliefs and my own goals and being an agent who tries to satisfy their goals given their beliefs and all that. And then there is another way of acting, which is acting as a group member. And this is the we mode idea. And there the idea is that a group of people collectively accept that they constitute a group. They attribute certain types of attitudes to this group, for instance, beliefs and goals. And then they act as group members, thinking of this group as the agent and then acting in accordance with the beliefs and desires or goals or intentions of this group. And then he tried to make this more precise by giving his detailed accounts of we mode. And the idea is that the collective acceptance is very central because that is the way of constructing groups with these intentional states. And then there are three conditions that have to be satisfied in order for thinking and acting to be in the we mode. And these are the collectivity condition, collective commitment, and group reason. And the collectivity condition means, for instance, in the case of a goal, if the group members have a goal, then the collectivity condition means that necessarily this goal cannot be satisfied to one member without it being satisfied to all members. So the goal is such that it cannot be satisfied on your own, it has to be satisfied for all. Then there is the collective commitment, which means that whenever the group members collectively accept something, then they are both personally committed to the content, but they are also committed to each other to taking this content as valid or true or correctly ascertainable in their activities as group members. And then there is an important group reason, which means that the collectively accepted contents, for instance, goals and so on, they provide reasons for action for the group members. So whenever the group members are acting as group members, then they are authorized to use these collectively accepted goals and beliefs and so on as premises for their practical and theoretical reasoning. So reasons for action.
Right. And that's about it, what we thought to say by way of introduction to Raimo and his work, so that we are ready to give the floor, as it were, to Mai. And please, Mai, the floor is yours. I stop sharing now. Thank you.
Can I maybe say a brief word? So thank you very much. And also we had this discussion about how we should handle questions and answer. And I think we agreed, Pekka, that we're going to handle this liberally. So if anyone wants to make a comment or raise a question, they are free to do so. But since this is not your formal presentation, but just a short intro, Raimo. So maybe let's proceed. And I guess most of you must know she has been very present at these conferences. She has been Raimo's partner for a very, very long time. Also his alter ego, I think, close communication partner, and also a co-author of Raimo's. She has a PhD in psychology, and she has developed, partly in cooperation with Raimo, but I think mostly of her own, distinctive view on trust, conception of trust that allows for trust to be a rationally held attitude, even though it is in her conception not subject to the will. So Mai, please share your wisdom with us.
Thank you. I'm trying to. So now you can hear me but not see me, right?
Right. You might want to go to the slideshow and start from the beginning, so the slides look a little bit bigger and they're easier to see.
So can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you, and we can't see the slides right now. So
Okay.
voice is all we have from your side right now. But as we have the full 4 hours for this symposium, and I'm really grateful to Saba for making this possible, there is no rush at all.
Mike, start with the share screen. Go to
Yes.
the slideshow and then from the beginning.
So can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, and we see the presenter view. If you want to show the slideshow, I think there is a tab at the top.
Oh, I see.
I think it's the one that says slideshow.
Yeah, so I have to go back then and yeah.
I think you can do it from this screen. Am I right?
Maybe because there's something in my way. Wait, I have to move this.
Click the slideshow.
Click the slideshow.
I know I should, but there is something in my way, so I'm trying to.
Ah, okay. You're pretty close.
I have to go back again. Wait. But now I can't share the screen again.
Can I use this time to share an anecdote? And I do it only because I know that Raimo really liked to keep things light. And Raimo was legendary at the time of the overhead projector. Can any one of you remember? He had this huge pile of slides, but sometimes he struggled a little bit with keeping the order. So when the time came of PowerPoint, we all wondered, we had conversations, how is Raimo going to deal with PowerPoint? And he did it again. So this is, of course, not to distract from the occasion and the purpose of this symposium, but this is an impression I had of Raimo. Maybe it was just me. I wonder how you experienced him. But he really liked to keep things light, as if, you know, the sort of differences we have in philosophy just needed just a tinge of irony. And I think he was exactly right. I think that that's really important, especially in a position where the goal is not just to establish a school or to start a new specialized debate, but where the aim is to bring people together from different perspectives. And that was his decided aim. I think it's really important to have the competence of handling fundamental differences. And he did it with keeping the tone light at the personal level while being rigorous and very clear in the content. And that's a capacity that I really admired in Raimo. And frankly, I mean, I'm not in a position to do so, but I would like to be able to imitate it. So now we can see the slide again, Mai.
Yes, I know. I don't know how to do this, because when there's something in my way, so I can't move to get to the slideshow.
I think that this is good enough. We can see from this.
Yes, we can see clearly.
Okay, so then okay. Can you see like this? Okay.
Yep.
So I'm now screen sharing, but I couldn't get to the, now there's something in my way, so I can't find this slideshow.
There's another,
behind something.
there's an icon. There's an icon.
I can try to move it, but if I get the grip on something, I'll move it. No, it doesn't move.
There's an icon at the bottom of the screen you can use to start the slideshow as well. A little lower.
And also pressing F5 might do the trick.
F5.
I think it's the bottom right corner, the symbol in the bottom right corner that Kirk meant, I suppose.
A little further over. It's the one that looks like a little screen on a stand.
Ah, okay, So screen on a stand.
Did you hear that, Mike?
Yeah, I heard it, but I can't see a screen on the stand.
Okay,
now I can see it. Yes, here.
That one.
Good.
Wunderbar, wunderbar.
Okay, so now you can hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yes, all is well. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you for inviting me. I'm really very happy about this. And of course, I was very nervous because I had so much to say, so I couldn't choose where to start and where to end. But I'm really grateful for being here, and I'm also grateful for Raimo's fantastic research group and mine too, of course, to have started this way. So it made my task much easier, because I sort of started just in the middle, thinking that everyone knows what Raimo means by the Wii Mode group, and I was going to do something very close to it, but I realized that I didn't have the idea at all to start from the very beginning. I was going to start from the middle, so to speak, assuming that everyone knows what Raimo was saying about the Wii Mode group. But you did a perfect job and taught me something at the same time. And also I want to say hi to Angelo Corletti, if he's there somewhere, and say that we were very pleased, Raimo and I, to be invited to San Diego, and that was not a very long time ago. So I'm really pleased to be in San Diego again, although I can't see all these beautiful places this time. And also thank you to those who are in the audience and whom I have met for being such good friends and discussion partners, at least those of you whom I know. And Raimo, of course, know more of all these people around the Wii Mode, or social ontology for that matter. And also thank you to our research group for giving the basis of how it all started, and also to you that I would say that without Bernhard's introduction, it would not have been the same, because now you sort of put the whole matter into another kind of frame that is important, something that is outside Helsinki, and sometimes outside our Munich group, that we sort of felt that Munich was the second place because we spent every summer in Munich and our group was invited there I don't know how many times, and of course all the fantastic times we had in the Alps. So thank you also for the picture of the Alps that I saw. And I was not going to say much about that either, but as Bernhard said, the history is a long time ago, and it started in Europe, and really many years. And so when I say walking and talking together, 35 years of love, sweat and tears, the 35 years means that Kalle met Raimo before me, because when I came into the picture, it was 85. And he was trying to carry the table upstairs. So when I talked to him in the very first moment almost, he was explaining to me what he means by carrying the table upstairs together in the Wii Mode. And I was with him from the very start, and he was just waiting for me to have more time for him to discuss these matters. And walking and talking together, 35 years of love, sweat and tears would mean the sweat you would understand, because he liked hot places and it was hard work. Tears you might not understand, I'll explain, and love you can of course guess that there must have been love. And now I will give first the personal part of my talk, and then I go into the topic that I thought I would contribute with, was the Wii Mode group as ontologically irreducible, ontologically a weakly collectivistic view with individuals as the causal motors, because I'm not going to explain it in that fantastic way as our research group did. I'm just going to be the historian here who has gathered material from Raimo's papers and books and from other people's comments and other people's articles about his view. And I hope that this task of the historian that I took upon me would lead to a conclusion about what he himself has said about his own account and how he understands this ontological position of the Wii Mode group. And it's a difficult discussion because he sort of gives us all these difficult words, and I'm not going to stop by every word and certainly not answer questions. I'm just going to go through a list of these words, And then by the end of the talk, I'm sure that they're all quite familiar to you. And also I'm ready to send this paper to those who are interested in looking more closely at the sources and all these things that I have to say. But now I start with the personal part, and you get to look at the picture of Raimo. So Raimo and I used to discuss the Wii Mode in terms of the authority system in the 19s. We pool our wills, give up part of our personal authority to the group to jointly achieve a specific joint goal and jointly act according to that ethos. Each of us perform his or her part of the group's action, or then we appoint operative members to act for the group. Another mind picture was small ships moving towards the same goal versus one big ship going there, where some of us act and others are in reserve. We discussed temporary Wii Mode groups, people standing on the bus stop, waiting for a bus that does not arrive, making plans. We also talked of the line between groups and mobs, as well as nations as groups with elected operative members. When we work together, we usually walk together. In many countries, in the forest, by our summer cabin at home, or in big cities, for instance, in central London. Without a map, in some countries, we walked on streets without sidewalks because we did not know where the nice parts were. Luckily, Raimo was good at finding his way back home, and I knew the forest. A walk for him was 2 to 4 hours long. Many high-heeled shoes did I destroy during those city walks, trying to be pretty for him. I remember that I wanted to know what is going on in the minds of people acting in the Wii Mode. What exactly do they have to think and believe? Gradually, the theory was forming. One detail after another was added to the puzzle work. We had left the authority system behind, and he was talking about a top-down theory. The group level on top and the member level below, where the members perform their parts of the group's action. I remember that I had a hard time seeing what he meant. For me, there must be the people first. So, okay, then I will do my part of the task that the group has set out to achieve. And the group exists as we go together and form the ethos that we collectively committed ourselves to. He thought it was funny when I had to see everything as a child. What comes first? I'm not a philosopher, but a theoretically oriented social psychologist. So he had to teach me the very basics in philosophy. Many times things line up in the right way when you check with real life. That was how I wrote my master's thesis on norms and roles in 1990, and my doctoral thesis on trust 2005. Putting the real world the way I knew it in a package. I think my biggest help to Raimo was that I kept asking questions and more questions until we found the last elephant at the bottom. And also about what Bernhard said about trust and Raimo. Well, Raimo had nothing to do with my trust account. Actually, he didn't even know my trust account. I once had a talk in Finland about my trust account, and he was asking questions as it was the first time he heard about it. So he sort of kept his hands away from that. But I remember that Kalle read my account, and Kalle was sort of my big authority. When Kalle put his thumb up, then I thought, now I'm finished. When we wrote From Social Imitation to Teamwork together, we had lots of fun. We discussed the matter walking in the forest. It was my idea to make this mind map that would show all the pieces in the puzzle. I think that the article is so old that the Wii Mode is not yet fully grown up. After every book, he said, this is the last book, then we will have a vacation. Well, it never happened, that vacation. He worked 365 days a year. I remember how walking and talking produced the cooperation book. He had left for Munich, where we spent some time every summer, and when I arrived, he was unhappy with the manuscript. We went walking in Englischer Garten and started from zero. The sweat and the love have probably come through here, but sometimes there were tears too. Luckily, we mostly had a good time and laughed so much that both of us were almost crying. However, we could have such heated arguments that I started to cry. Despite being the less qualified person, I don't give up easily. After arguing for 3 days, sending each other written proofs in between, I would in fact mostly win. Once I only got the footnote. Luckily, we had our reading group to discuss with Kaarlo Miller, Pekka Mäkelä, and Raul Hakli. Some years also other members like Petri Ylikoski, Mikko Salmela, Arto Laitinen, and Matti Sarkia. To be in such a great company for almost 30 years has been a gift that I will always treasure. For Raimo and me, it was the first group. It was the group of musketeers, the site for friendship, trust, support, expertise, and fun. So this was the personal part, and then I go to the slides. I'll show you another slide here that is not my talk, of course, but this is the ex libris that I had made for Raimo's books that are going to be donated to the University of Helsinki. So if you have students that go to the University of Helsinki library to study Raimo Tuomela, they will probably find somewhere a little room or maybe just shelves somewhere with this ex libris in every book. And if you can, I don't know if you can see, but it says, or there is a group carrying the piano upstairs, and there is two people carrying a table, and they're in the Wii Mode, of course, and then there is a duet singing, and of course being in the same boat, unus pro omnibus, omnes pro uno, it says. And the painting is very important because it was Raimo's and my favorite painting that I have painted on the basis of, it's a variation of a painting made by an Argentinian artist born 31, and the painting is named Staccato, that made 1965, and it can be found in Boston. So when we were at the conference ISO's conference in Boston, we went to an art gallery, and not in the gallery, but in the gift shop, you can see this painting, or actually the real painting that is not like this, but I have made several variations, and I keep the colors, but I move the stripes around and I make other figures, but they're all sort of roundish. And I'm going to go on with this series made on the basis of this original for many years yet, because I just started this when Raimo was in a bad shape, so I had to stop painting. But it's still sort of, I'm very, very much in love with this original painting that you can see in Boston in the gift shop. I don't remember even which was the art gallery. Museum of Fine Arts, it says. Okay, so if you go there, please go and look at this in the gift shop made by Cesar Paternoster. And now to the talk. The Wii Mode group as ontologically irreducible. Ontologically, a weakly collectivistic view with individuals as the causal motors. And this is what I found out after having spent months digging down in all the piles of printed material that was all around me when he passed away, and I had to, actually was a task to throw things away. And I stopped throwing things away because I started to read, and I got so interested in his position and what is he really going to end up saying. And then I read also his colleagues' comments on his work and his answer to these comments. And then in the end, I started to change the idea, because I realized that those who say that his view is individualistic are almost right, but he himself wanted to say weakly collectivistic. And this is, of course, the mystery of how something can be weakly collectivistic, and is it really weakly collectivistic? In what way is it weakly collectivistic? And is it Okay, according to people who study ontology, they might have another view of social ontology, but in the end, I found a very important paper of Raimo where he himself reveals his view on ontology. And I don't think many people have read that paper. So the surprise is in the end, and that's why the title of this talk is Weakly Collectivistic. But how can you do this? I don't really understand, except that you have to then do the work, and those who are interested in this matter can view this material that I have gathered and do their own work on it. So I can send it to them. So I'm not going to stop with all these items that I will now go through, but I'm willing to send it to you, and I'm not saying anything myself. I'm just letting Raimo say these things. Okay, and so now I go to the next slide. So after this talk, you may want to discuss and say something about this thing, and maybe some other person can better answer any questions you may have, but there will be time for discussion afterwards. And what is his position here is the question, and he himself can now speak through me, and I'm not going to take a standpoint. I'm just repeating what he's going to say here. And it starts with a list of keywords and then goes on to evaluations by his colleagues and also maybe his answers. And then I let himself end this by his own view on ontology and the kind of methodological individualism he could accept, which is not a joke, because he really says it in those words that he could accept this kind, which would not be called probably methodological individualism by other people. And then if there is time, I will end by a personal epilogue where I say something more about Raimo's private life and what he was doing when he was not writing. And forgive me if not everyone is mentioned here when I go through other people's text, because I left out text from those that you already would know what their opinion is. So I don't have text by Bratman or Margaret Gilbert or many other people here, but the criteria for choosing what I mention here is which people who will say something specific about ontology here and discuss it closely and maybe discuss Raimo's social ontology. So I would start now. I don't know if you can you see the whole slide? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, fine, all good.
Can you see the whole slide?
Yes.
Okay, because I can't see the whole slide. Okay. Because there is this thing up on top that is disturbing, the slide for me that I was complaining about earlier. And I don't know how to get it moved away from here. But I won't touch it now because I'm too scared of destroying everything. Okay, so now I get to the slide. Number 7, I see. So, ontological reducibility versus irreducibility of an account of acting together is a central topic, causing disagreement and perhaps even confusion concerning Raimo's work. The same goes for the discussion about an account being ontologically collectivistic instead of individualistic. In my understanding, ontological irreducibility of a group does not go together with ontological individualism, nor does ontological reducibility go together with ontological collectivism. Now, I now understand why Raimo's account was so hard to position ontologically individualistic, but weakly collectivistic and ontologically irreducible. That's what I understand that his own view is going to be here when I show you all the keywords. My aim today is to try to pin down his own view about his position by presenting keywords from his text regarding ontological reducibility, irreducibility, and ontological individualism, collectivism. I end up concluding that he considered the Wii Mode group as ontologically weakly collectivistic. The group acts only in an extrinsic, as if, or partly fictitious sense when the group members act qua members of a social system, as well as ontologically irreducible in a general sense, due to the emergent properties on the group level versus the member level, leading to action as one agent on rational structural grounds, CF results in the high-low game. In various sources, he presented the Wii Mode group as consisting of just individuals and their interrelations, a group that can have extrinsic beliefs and can act only in a partly fictitious sense and objectively real when characterized as a social system of individual agents. So, I repeat that this is not a regular paper, it's rather a talk for people who know his work. The list of keywords to follow is part of the evidence I gathered for my quest to give a label to his view. My contribution is hopefully to offer material for those who wish to look more closely at sources where he explains his ideas. Thus, I will send my paper to those who ask for it afterwards. Here, I will just read various citations and go on to more fruitful illustrations of what his Wii Mode group and his view on ontology are about. So here's the list of keywords. First, holistic, ontologically irreducible, mainly in a rational structural sense and in the sense of supervenient emergence. So don't be scared of that supervenient emergence. I got to learn that supervenience and emergence are difficult words that people have different meanings for, and that some are historically something else. But he keeps saying all the time supervenient or emergent or supervenient emergence in his text. So you just have to bear with it and guess what it might mean. Irreducibility as emergence. So causally emergent holistic properties of groups that none of the individuals have. And irreducibility in a rational structural sense of Bacharach's theorem as applied, for instance, to the high-low game entailing a different number of equilibria for two competing approaches. There will be more explained about this rational structural sense soon. And there are inbuilt holistic features in the Wii Mode, and partially it functions top-down, and it cannot be reduced to individualistic accounts. And the structural and emergent-based irreducibility of the Wii Mode entails the inapplicability of methodological individualism, conceptually and ontologically irreducible Wii as its source. So these are things that I can send you, and you can look into the sources and see what he wants to say here and why he says it. And I will talk about it a little bit and also show what other people say about this. And functional social action system, non-intentional system with causal power. This is what he also wants to say about his Wii Mode group. Groups as real but non-agentive social systems supervenient on the members functioning qua group members. Group agent as a collectively constructed functional social action system, and in simple cases, a group agent as a social system amounts to a group of individual agents capable of joint action and control over the group's performance, for instance, concerning satisfying its ethos. Causal power as a non-intentional system grounded in an ontologically individualistic or better interrelational framework. Group agents qua non-intentional systems have causal powers and are capable of causing outcomes in the world. And then Raimo claims only sufficient conditions for his account. I will come back to that later, but he just wanted to give the possibility for other people to be able to also have some other conditions for groups that can act as groups. And then weakly collectivistic, he used weakly collectivistic approach, far from full-blown anti-individualism. Human beings ontologically the only agentive causal motors. Groups can only act through their members' activities. Ontologically, it does not postulate full-blown, intrinsically intentional group agents with minds of their own, while recognizing the existence of social groups as basically irreducible social systems. The present approach is ontologically individualistic in the sense that Wii Mode states and properties are attributed to individuals. And the general conclusion of this section is that Wii Mode notions in many cases, if not generally, are not individualistically reducible without the conflict with liberal ontological naturalism and realism about the social realm. Here he refers to his 85 book, Science, Action, and Reality, on the kind of realism he adheres to, internal realism. And then he says something about conceptual matters, conceptually and theoretically irreducible, not conceptually reducible, not definable by or functionally constructible from I-mode concepts, and not explainable. Explanatory reduction typically means theoretical reduction. Here from writings in Tuomela 2005 about conceptual matters, my analysis is rather meant to elucidate the irreducible notion of Wii intention in a functionally informative way. And then he says a form of individualism that hardly can be qualified as methodologically individualism, but could be conceived of one that accepts irreducible groups as long as these are created through individuals' action, interaction, and interdependencies. In the 2013 book, he also uses the terms extrinsic versus intrinsic. And the difference between intrinsic to show the difference between beliefs as a group member group versus a private person. Sometimes he uses the term party fictitious or as if sense. A group cannot really believe anything or act in the normal sense of belief and action, but in a party fictitious sense, the Wii Mode group has beliefs and acts. This way of expressing group attitudes and action indicates that the Wii Mode group can act as a group, although we, the members, are the actors, related to each other and to the group level in a very special top-down way to be explained below. So the top-down idea of the Wii Mode group and no reduction is this section. Aggregative accounts of groups, pro-group I-mode groups in Raimo's terms, consists of people who share goals and act in concert in a distributive sense to achieve these shared goals. Here the goals are achieved, if achieved, simultaneously for contingent reasons. In the case of Wii Mode groups, the joint goals are, if achieved, necessarily achieved simultaneously for all members. That was the collectivity condition. This has to do with the fact that the group is the subject or the party fictitious. The members perform their part actions of the group's task, and this is, in short, the so-called top-down aspect of the Wii Mode group. Here are some quotes about these important features of the Wii Mode group. The members of a Wii Mode group construct their collection as a social group. Goals and attitudes are explicated in terms of the members' collective construction by way of their performative reflexive collective acceptance. The members' collective construction under their own conceptualization of them together constituting a functional group agent, and collective construction is taken to be collective acceptance that is based on people's capacity to imagine and pretend things, compose wholes of them. Group agents as collectively constructed functional social action systems, collectively conceptually constructed. The emergent features on the group level result in that reduction will not work from Wii Mode to I-mode groups, according to Raimo. Wii Mode reasoning is not reducible to pro-group I-mode reasoning. It is not definable by or functionally constructible from I-mode reasoning. Wii Mode reasoning employs a different reasoning mechanism that relies on groups as the theoretically basic agents of reasoning, and that in some cases leads to different results than the latter. Group agents have blah blah and also epistemically objective existence as an extrinsically intentional group agent. So now we come to other views and comments from others. So you can correct me in the discussion section if I said something silly about this, but here are sort of really a short comment from books. According to Marja Jankovic and Kirk Ludwig, Tuomela's ontological position could hardly be classified as purely collectivistic, although he accepts social groups as real entities capable of causally affecting the real world. They note that Raimo holds that Wii mode joint intentions are conceptually primitives, meaning that shared I mode intentions need not amount to joint intention. And then Raimo and Pekka, Mäkelä, the group's responsibility as a group is a consequence of the group as an extrinsically intentional agent where the group's attitude is irreducible to its members' private attitudes. The group attitude is formed by the members or by their chosen operative members, and they stand behind it as group members. However, they cannot escape moral responsibility as private persons by hiding behind the group banner. On the other hand, the group should take responsibility for what it caused, and this includes absent members and even for what the group caused before the group was dissolved, as well as for dissidents' actions when the members did not try to stop them. And Matti Sarki earlier, Heinonen, holds Raimo's theory as ontologically individualistic but theoretically collectivistic. As we saw, Raimo himself saw the Wii mode group as ontically irreducible and weakly collectivistic, stressing that his group consisted of individuals not intrinsically acting group agents, but still defended the view of ontic irreducibility in a general sense, as well as conceptual and theoretical irreducibility. Sarki states that the central difference between the I mode and the Wii mode theories is not that of individual versus collective agency, but of agency in a conceptual sense based on a person's private mental states versus agency based in part on the group's attitudes. Both kinds are personal states in the sense of being attributed to individuals, Wii mode states being essentially public and group dependent, while I mode states are private and atomistic. I can't say what Raimo would say about this, but I know that Raimo himself stressed that their groups are ontically irreducible and weakly collectivistic. Ontically weakly collectivistic is what Raimo's view is according to this material that I have gathered. Okay, and then we come to Christian List and Philip Pettit, and Raimo discusses the account of group agents by List and Pettit, agent that they describe as relatively autonomous entities, agents in their own right, with minds of their own. The group is irreducible due to holistic supervenience, but ontologically individualistic. Aggregates of individual attitudes produce group attitudes, and supervenience gives the group autonomy. Group facts are not definitionally reducible to individual facts. A bottom-up account would not work. They still hold on to a version of methodological individualism. They have an individualistic, epistemic, and functionalistic perspective. Thus, minds of their own refers to extrinsic intentionality. Raimo claimed that the authors list some necessary conditions that are not sufficient for group agency above a naturalistic sense due to lack of irreducible fictitious group features. Group agents too weak to be group persons in Raimo's sense. For his own conditions for group agency, Raimo claimed sufficiency but not necessity. To me, the I mode group under discussion is a good example of the I mode way of making group agents by some operative members representing non-operative members. And then David Schweikart and Hans Bernhard Schmid understand Raimo's work on we intentions as grounded in an ontically individualistic or better interrelational framework based on Raimo's own words, and his work as an elucidation of the irreducible notion of we intention in a functionally informative way. And then C also, groups are agents only in a metaphorical sense. So they refer to books 2005, 2005, and 2007. And this proves that he's a reductionist according to these authors. They also discuss Deborah Tollefsen's views 2015 and mention her expression to interpret that a group acts. My own addition here is that as to conceptual and ontological irreducibility, Raimo stressed that his account is that in a general sense, due to emergent supervenience on the group level and on structural grounds. I assume he meant here the top-down structure. I understand that it is this top-down structure that makes the we perspective with a non-distributive and properly collective, conceptually and ontologically irreducible we as a source concrete. The description of the we perspective is in 2017 book, for instance. Raimo noted that the difference between the I mode and the we mode concerned both the psychological generation of the states and the conceptual and ontological content. An important feature of the top-down structure is the making of a collection of people, our group, or a social status in the sense of Searle. By constructing or collectively accepting it as our group, the members perform their parts of the group's action. Raimo's idea of the top-down structure of the we mode group coincides with his view of ontology as expressed by Keith Sawyer. Raimo's notes from Explanation and Emergence in Social Science, who notes that strong emergence is a form of social realism that supports the emergence of higher level properties that cannot be reduced and that have downward causal powers, even though social groups are composed of individuals. I based this on notes by Raimo that I found, but I cannot find a text by Sawyer with that title. There is an article by him, The Mechanisms of Emergence, 2004, though. However, it could have been Raimo's own notes for a book review, 1994, on Petit's The Common Mind. And then I go to Mattia Galotti. He wonders if epistemic irreducibility has led to the assumption of ontological irreducibility, maybe through associating primitives with epistemic irreducibility, thus removing it from the context of ontological irreducibility, where it should remain to concern the conditions of existence and identity, and not knowledge of collective states. He notes that epistemic irreducibility does not prove that something is a brute fact in the sense of ontological irreducibility. He refers to Tollefsen 2004. Raimo discusses these matters in his above mentioned book. So it's the 2013 book, which is paperback 2016. And now we come to Seamus Miller, who wrote a review on Raimo's social ontology book, but Raimo never published his reply. It could earlier be seen on his CV at the Tint site. The main point of the critique is that for the collective attitudes to be a new mode, for the we mode to be real, these must be ontologically irreducible. As has been stated in various ways above, Raimo argues in his book for ontological irreducibility in a general sense for the we mode group due to emergent features on the group level and for rational structural reasons. Thus, the group functions as one agent through its top-down structure by its members' actions for a group reason. Miller writes that Raimo is stipulating, but his answer is that it's a question of entailments, derived, not stipulated. The group action is a consequence of the members performing their parts of the group's action. And this results in a different account than the aggregative account. He is showing us what it takes to act as a group, thus he exposes the relevant structure for that. Miller offers an example of a tight group without the we mode, a fraternity. It's a good example. Among students, the closeness is supposed to develop after becoming a member. Mafia groups are tight as fraternity as a fraternity, and here the tightness may be a matter of life and death. In a high-load game, the fraternity members choose as separate agents and cannot guarantee success if all clues are lacking, in contrast to the Wii Mode group that necessarily chooses as one agent. The Wii Mode account is based on normal group life and fits well to big groups with operative members acting for the group, as well as to small groups that function as teams. As stated above, Raimo is also quite clear in his defense of only weak collectivism in this real Wii Mode group, being a partly fictitious entity with real features based on the members' intentional states and actions. The group is real as a collectively conceptually constructed, functional, but non-intentional social system of interrelated individuals, a system having causal power in the world. Raimo has made an idealized model to expose the conceptual difference between the Wii Mode and the pro-group I Mode. Cheating, free riding, and protests can always occur, and such matters are solved in various ways. The main point is to argue for the existence of a group that can act as a group in a deeper sense than an aggregation of people acting. The central idea is the Wii perspective that gets a conceptual structure, the top-down structure in a group that can act as a group. In his work to draw maps of the social world, he wanted to show that Wii Mode groups exist as ontologically irreducible and ontologically weakly collectivistic groups beside pro-group I Mode groups. We all know them as teams that can act as teams. Raimo showed how such a notion can be elucidated, claiming only sufficient conditions. Frank Hendricks discusses the Wii Mode account as conceptually collectivistic and ontologically reductionist or individualistic. This resulted in an interesting and clarifying reply from Raimo. He writes that groups that can act as groups are individualistically irreducible, with extrinsic attitudes, and such functional group agents are real, causally producing outcomes in the world through their members' actions. Their wants and beliefs are constructed by the collective acceptance of the members. Raimo adds that there are individualistic ingredients in the ontology of the Wii Mode theory. Individuals are the basic purposive initiators of causal change in the social realm. However, his view is far from ontological individualism. He does not reduce groups as social systems to individuals, nor does his account eliminate groups. He claims that extrinsic states of the group that are explanatory based on the group agent's real actions can hardly be fully fictitious. Raimo's methodological individualism. The above will bring us to the most important point of this presentation, Raimo's view on the MI version that he would accept. Ontological irreducibility and weakly collectivistic, where does this take us? The background is a view on the ontology in the social realm as one that accepts groups that are not individualistically reducible without a conflict with ontological naturalism and realism about the social realm, a kind of internal realism. In an article, Individualism and Collectivism in Social Science 2012, he writes about the ultimate inadequacy of MI and that irreducible Wii Mode thinking and acting needs to be taken into account in the best explaining social theory, CF group reasoning and other joint thinking. If the participant, in contrast, reasons individualistically, we can have a combination of individualism and collectivism, if also irreducible groups are allowed as kind of exogenous explanatory factors concerning members' actions. To take us back to the workshop floor with the new MI, we have Wii Mode groups are real, means that they ontologically exist as groups, as functional action systems, causing changes in the world when the members act, or as in Raimo's answer to Hendricks, my theory can be regarded as partly collectivistic as to ontology because groups are acting social systems, because groups as acting social systems are causally real. Yet the collective causation has the kind of microstructure according to which the ultimate causation happens through individuals functioning as members of the group. Here I will let Sawyer have the last word. He suggests that empirical work must determine whether a social property is reducible or not. His arguments lean towards a non-reductionist and realist account of emergentism. He thinks that most social properties seem to meet the criteria of non-reducibility. Most social properties are non-aggregative. Many social systems are not decomposable. So in conclusion, when Raimo introduced the Wii Mode group, he was stressing a holistic view of the goal as the group's goal and the subject as one actor, the members of the group acting jointly towards the group's goal. The crucial point is the functional holistic subject. He presented the structure of the Wii Mode group in detail as a subject, and everyone can see what it is that makes the difference. How these people only can act as a group due to its top-down structure. How that came about through collective construction of the group as our group, and why there are emergent features on the group level. When many people discuss a matter, be it all the members or just some operative members, new ideas within the boundaries of the ethos may arise. The emergent supervenience is an everyday matter, but it causes, in some cases, ontological irreducibility. The members acting as one agent, for instance, in the high-low game, is another reason for claiming irreducibility, as the Wii Mode group can only act in this way for structural reasons. Raimo's view of the ontology of entities in the social world, documented in his 85 book and mentioned in his book 2013, realism about the social realm and ontological naturalism, internal realism, has guided him to his view of the ontological irreducibility of the Wii Mode group in many cases, if not generally. He does not claim that this is the only type of group that can act as one agent, and thus he claims only sufficient conditions for his account. When people unite in painting a house together in pro-group IMOD, making agreements about part performances, and the shared goal is achieved, is compared with painting the house as a Wii Mode group and sharing the group goal in the Wii Mode. What makes the big difference? The central point is the top-down account, thus the group level. The Wii Mode group is constructed as our group, involving the members' reflexive and performative acceptance of attitudes and goals for the group, in the same sense as the $5 bill is an institutional construction. The team scores and the choir sings while the members jointly perform their parts of the group's action. When the group chooses high in the high-low game, there is just one agent that chooses. The Wii Mode group acts as one agent for rational structural reasons, as a contrast to contingent reasons. The Wii Mode group is needed for having a full account of the social world. In an I-mode group, people may be glued together in many ways, but they are still separate agents acting in concert. We-ness, in the sense of Hans Bernhard Schmid's plural pre-reflective self-awareness as a plural subject, Raimo seemed to accept calling it a viable account of the phenomenological features involved in a person's functioning in the Wii mode. However, I understand that he did not exclude that this plural self-awareness could be present also in some cohesive pro-group I-mode context. However, a central notion of my own trust account rests on a mainly pre-reflective shared experience of mutual gratification, a certain expectations that are mutually recognized and thus seen as rights. And now do I still have time for an epilogue on some personal points in Raimo's life?
By all means, go ahead.
So, working with Raimo for over 30 years was a way of life, where he was the master and I was the student and critic. So I'll try to change to the first slide here, so you have something nice to look at. So he was the master and I was the student and critic. I checked his story against real life and asked questions until everything was clear as to a child. He taught me philosophy using everyday language. I wanted to go on working on my own topic, collective trust and power relations and trust, but I had too little extra time for myself, as he was so productive and I was also busy with other tasks. Traveling with him meant more time to work for him. I was quite often on leave from my job, but it usually meant that all my job tasks were waiting for me. I had a full-time job, many years of academic and work-related studies, organizational work, and some years in municipal politics. Housekeeping, my own children, his children, visiting, and later on 10 grandchildren and 12 years of oil painting. Luckily, we found time to walk together, also in the Alps, to go jogging, swimming, and enjoy paddling in our tandem kayak at the summer cabin. We went to concerts, theaters, and at home we listened to music and watched movies. We shared the love for classical music and jazz. We used to have contests in recognizing symphonies. In his last years, he joined me at the gym and finally in Pilates. So you see, besides being so productive writing, he had time for private life. My gift to him was to excuse him from practical chores. I don't want to be a bad role model, but I realized I was married to an unusually intellectually gifted but hopelessly unpractical person, and I was not going to make him perform his part of the boring chores. Our reading group was a haven where all problems got solved. While being quiet Finns, our cascades of laughter must have puzzled people walking past the door. Collective responsibility was Pekka Mäkelä's topic, but all of us wanted to be involved. Raul Hakli was luckily a game theory expert who could correct our thinking, and Kalle Miller was the ultimate checkpoint. If he said okay, then it was okay. And so I move to my last slide. Raimo left a great treasure behind, not only the Wii Mode, but all the younger scholars who got inspired by the field of collective intentionality and social ontology through his work. Today, the world needs the Wii Mode more than ever. Thank you for listening.
And thank you very much, Mai, for this extremely substantive contribution that placed Raimo in all sorts of debates. And I think you did just a terrific job of expressing gratitude to Raimo, bringing back his work to life. And also thank you very much for those insights into other aspects of Raimo's life. Now, in our conversation, Mai, you said that you would welcome maybe questions or maybe additions, remarks from the audience. But I think we talked about that this is probably going to be a bit difficult because the mood is going to be rather solemn. And but nevertheless, if any of you wants to contribute or maybe question, I think Mai is willing to take your points. If not,
and maybe I want to give them to the group if I cannot answer it, but I'll try.
Yeah, you can always ask later or comment later. For now, I'd say let's take, shall we say, a 7 minutes break? Is that enough for everyone? And reconvene for Kalle's, Pekka's, and Raul's contribution in 7 minutes.
Our group would suggest 10 minutes break.
10.
If that's okay.
10 minutes.
Okay, great.
I suppose 10 minutes is done, I suppose.
I think I agree. The break is up.
Right.
Now, you have introduced yourself so forcefully in the intro to Raimo Tuomela, and also Mai has made such a keen observation on the whole group dynamics that I think most everyone here must feel that they really already know you personally. Therefore, I'm not introducing you, if that's okay. And I just give you the floor.
Okay. No, it's very much okay. So I start sharing the screen again. I think it is this one. And then we go. And here we go. So this is the so-called part 2 of our talk, which began before my talk. And now we're going to talk a little about our joint collaborations with Raimo. And as Bernhard said, there's been quite a bit of talk about our group as a Wii Mode group and our group activities together. So we pretty much skip this. It's obvious that we had an actively collaborating research group, having weekly reading groups, and as Mai said, we're the funny part of the week quite often. But we want to express our so-called, let's say, institutional gratitude to Raimo, because he was a pretty good fundraiser, and thanks to him and thanks to that capacity, he was able to employ us for many years each. And certainly we wouldn't be here without that support we got from him because of that. So we wanted to do that. And now I give the screen to Kalle, who's the one who has collaborated the longest time of all of us. Why doesn't it move? And here you are, Kalle. Shoot.
Okay. Okay. A little bit of background why this kind of intentions and practical reasoning patterns are. Raimo took them up. It's roots in action theory, and there come intentions, where intentions are central, and as already was indicated, social action theory, according to Raimo, involves so-called we intentions. And as a first approximate sketch, we used these simple patterns of reasoning that start with an expression that's in first person case, and it starts with an expression of a we intention, and then we come to a belief of the intending agent, and eventually somehow he ends up in doing his part of the joint action that X stands for. And of course, for example, looking at the first one, the conclusion is not entailed in any sense, but the premises give, the idea is that the premises give the we intention and the beliefs give the agent a reason to participate, and also push pressure on him when he truthfully expresses his intention with the words "we will do X." That's an expression of the we intention. And the second one is a typical means-ends reasoning, starting with an end that person somehow has acquired. Maybe they have accepted a plan or something, and he accepts that we will do something, and then he realizes that there's a member A who that our doing of X requires that this member does his work as well. So it's a necessary thing that he does, and so unless the agent thinks that unless he teaches or helps the other person to do something, he cannot this person cannot do his part, unless this part is necessary, then the agent reasons that he will do that, for example, teach the other. So this is starting from an end, and which is the expression of the way intention, the agent slides towards the means, and here necessary means, and then to the conclusion of performing the part, or here teaching. In the second one, teaching the agent doing something. So this is typical. I think from Aristotelian. Kant had the idea that who intends the end. That I think in German it was, because we have some German audience, it was that wer den Zweck will auch das die notwendige Mittel. And he thought that who intends an end also intends the necessary means to its satisfaction. And Kant thought that this was an analytic statement, so it necessarily follows that if something is necessary, you have to intend to do it. So this is a kind of binding in this sense, a binding matter. And the basic thing is here that in both of these cases, the premises give the agent a reason to do. Yes. Here is I've simplified it a little bit, leaving out unnecessary sub-indexes and whatever there was, but the simple basic idea that was in 1988 that an analysis of definition of intention, saying that we have a third-person case and an agent. So we intend to do something, and he intends to do his part of it. So this is thought to be a constituent, and he has a belief that it's possible to achieve this. And also, I will not discuss this consensus or mutual belief, or we have some argument to prove that at least the 3 layers of in some cases, of 4 layers of I believe that you believe that, so on, is necessary, but I will not go into that. Simply that there's kind of analyze mutual belief, simply that there is some kind of consensus that it's possible to perform the action. And later Raimo added a 4th clause. For example, in this paper, we intentionally revisited that the part intention is the agent intends because he believes this and that. So paradigmatically, a quote, a we intention is participatory intention of a group member to do his part in a joint action together with the other members, and he intends to perform his part. And here we analyze in the paper, we analyze what means doing his part as his part. It means that he does the part as his part with the intention that the joint action comes about. Okay, next, yes. And simply, there was a famous criticism by John Searle concerning this analysis, and it has 2 parts. First of all, Searle said that there can be a case where a member can satisfy these conditions and yet fail to have a we intention. And his example was some was it young economist or economic students who believed in Adam Smith's invisible hand and thought that pursuing their own interests leads to the benefit of all. And these guys do this, so they satisfy. If we go back to the definition, so they intend to do their parts on an agent intends to pass the hash, so that he believes that this is possible and believes that we have a consensus among these young economists that how we're doing, pursuing our own interest is best, is the results for the best of the whole. But yet, this is not a we intention, according to Searle. And of course, it is not. But I think he deliberately left out the idea that we had the idea that doing one's part as one's part in order to contribute to the common. And this is what doing with the participatory intention is about. Okay, but then we come to another problem, which I briefly can we go to next, this one. No, this. That if we define doing one's part in collective enterprise towards the joint action, then in the analysis we are presupposing already the we intention that it was supposed to be about. So the definition is circular. Raimo had a very complicated answer. I will not go into, according to the circularity came that he insisted that it's not viciously circular, but it's somehow circular, and so on. I will not have any time here to go into any detail. Maybe you have something to say about this. Okay, because Gabriel is talking about intentions too in a more sophisticated way than we did in this old paper. Anyway, our point and Shell claims that this says that this reductive analysis fail, but our intention, and we wrote already in the paper that it's not intended to be reductive, but it's a kind of new. We are dealing with a kind of new intentions, that is we intentions, and in the family of intentions, and it is not reducible to some other concepts or beliefs. And now the thing is, and in Raimo's later works, he introduces the Wii Mode and Wii Mode intentions, and is this a new mode, so to speak? And I don't want to go into what he says about it. My view is probably more individualistic than his, but simply what I think in just without any technical terms is that first we intention is attributed to a single member, but it can of course be shared, and so it's a single member that's a subject of the intentions, as Pekka distinguished between subject and content and motive. And the we intention is something that I have in my head or in my mind when I say truthfully that we intend to do X, a joint action. For example, we intend to carry the table, we intend to get married, and so on. Normal intentions entail a can, that the agent doesn't intend what he cannot do. But these we intentions, I cannot get married alone, maybe the table is too heavy, I cannot do it alone. But what I can do is to participate in this, and that's why it's participatory intention. And participatory intention, it is not reducible to any non-participatory intention. In that sense, it's a unique kind of intention. And it's in the intention mode, sure, and it's not reducible to, say, any want mode or belief together with the belief mode or something like that, if you want to call it. Called we intentions in a we mode, so I think it's terminological matter. I can accept that. But what I think is that it's the content of the intention that individuates the intention, what intention it is, and the content of a we intention is a participatory intention. There is the intention to participate, and we individuate the intention by its content. The content tells what exactly it is that the agent intends, and we can put whatever there is required like content also. Okay, let's go to the next thing. Now and then here in the paper we give this more than 30 years ago, this kind of sketch. So that is Raimo's idea what we do with the notion of we intention. And first, if they can account for the intentional joint action, and to get intentional joint action, and we intentions can use to be characterized social norms. And once we have the notion of social norms, social roles can be analyzed. And with the help of roles and we intentions, one can define a strong normative notion of social group. And then we can proceed to institutions and so on to social community, and without adding any holistic social notions. Whether this is so, we can discuss, but that's what Raimo and I at that time at least thought, through the conceptual basis. So did this come about, this kind of plan? Pekka said when he read this first that this sounds like the table of contents of Raimo's book, The Importance of Us. That Raimo did much of this, and in many books and subsequent papers. But whether what is missing from this sketch and what was already taken up here, in the definition of we intention, there is no collective acceptance explicitly. Where the we intention comes from is taken for granted. And there's no mention of the we mode specifically, and no mention of the, well, there is some kind of collective commitment, but not the real, what he later on sketched. But yet, this is the core, what can be complemented with various other notions. I think I will end up here and leave them. Who is talking?
Me. So we don't take questions now. Let's take them at the end of the joint endeavor. As I said, I came to know Raimo better as his research assistant when he was working on the. I just had finished my master's thesis, and he was working on the manuscript of The Importance of Us. And I read it, the manuscript over and over again, so I know that book pretty well, I think. And I suppose it was the book that I'm still stuck with in my understanding what Raimo really meant. So I'm a very slow student in that sense. And then during that process, I was thinking about a topic for my PhD. And actually, I wanted to do a PhD on free will, that I was very enthusiastic about it. But Raimo kindly and rightly told me that I don't have what it takes to make an interesting contribution to that discussion. It's been going on too long and it's too sophisticated for my PhD. And I should do my PhD on collective responsibility, which I did. And to certain extent, to Raimo's disappointment, I ended up defending a rather individualistic understanding, or at least I made an attempt to argue against responsibility of group agents in their own right, as it were. Anyhow, it also became the topic that we wrote most of our joint papers on. We did some papers on social action and collective action dilemmas, but the most perhaps ambitious and at least the topic of most of our disagreements and arguments was the collective responsibility. And indeed, the last paper, the paper that turned out to be the last Raimo ever published was our joint paper in the Routledge Handbook of Collective Responsibility, edited by Saba and Debbie, and it was called A Wii Mode Account of Group Action and Group Responsibility. I thought that always thought, and I think Raimo accepted that he thought that the collective responsibility context, because of the meta-ethical discussion and the normative context, was a bit of a test case for his account of group agency. That what kind of sense can we make in light of Raimo's account of collective attributions of responsibility? And there was a hypothesis we agreed upon, which was that groups acting in the Wii mode are pretty much the strongest candidate for group agents capable of bearing moral responsibility in their own right, at least what has been in the offing in the literature and open detailed enough. I think that was true. We didn't agree on how the hypothesis survives the test, I think. Anyway, in the paper, which to my satisfaction, we actually, and Raimo was a bit reluctant, we discussed this topic in terms of truth conditions, at least in some parts, and we claim that actually group responsibility for an action performed by the group can be accounted for in terms of responsibility ascribed jointly to individual members of the group, acting qua group members. And indeed, this is pretty individualistic to my understanding. It's very much in line of what he says in The Importance of Us. I think the important dimension of this account was that the group responsibility entails the responsibility on the individual level of both operative and non-operative members. And here the distinction between operative and non-operative members is cashed out in terms of who are active in the action that is attributed to the group and who's passive. Non-operative members are passive. And I explain how they get tied up into this understanding of group responsibility in terms of Wii mode account in a sec. And here we use as a paradigm case a group that is acting both internally and externally freely. That is, there's no coercion inside the group of the members to one another, and the group is not externally forced to do anything. So they, in that sense, they act internally and externally freely. And Raimo liked to say in somewhat metaphorical terms that in such a case, a Wii mode group can be said to act out of its own group will. And as already has become obvious, the proper Wii mode in Raimo's sense entails collective commitment and collective acceptance of certain contents of belief or intention or goal for the group by the members. And in the case of Wii mode action, individual members of the group bear moral responsibility together and interdependently exactly because of these reasons, namely that they are jointly committed to one another and to the content. Also, that applies to non-operative members. And so in that sense, the collective attribution of moral responsibility to the group satisfies the collectivity condition or principle. And that means that if one member is responsible, then every member is. And of course, there are differences in degrees. Operative members are obviously less responsible for the outcome or the action than those that are active. But anyway, because they are maintaining the structure, the sort of reason-giving structure of a Wii mode group or the Wii mode action, they are entailed by the action because they maintain the the attitudes that led to the action in question. And that so far everything's fine by me, but then at the end we asked the question, are the Wii Mode groups good enough to be agents and to bear moral responsibility in their own right? And I thought I was happy with the Wii Mode activity outcome of the paper, and I thought we said no, but indeed Raimo didn't. Raimo thought that the answer should be qualified yes, that they are sort of agents, but not quite literally agents. And I thought that the test would be whether they are capable, whether they can satisfy at qua groups the conditions of a moral agent. And I thought the answer should be pretty clearly no. Raimo thought that maybe they can be extrinsically responsible for their action. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to talk this through, and this is a thing that I'm going to do my future research on. I want to find out what Raimo really wanted to say and perhaps what he should have said about this. Thanks. And now I give the floor, as it were, to Raul.
Yes, thank you. So when I joined the group, my first task pretty much was to do something with the new book that Raimo had at the time, named Cooperation, and translate or somehow present some parts or some ideas that were in this book to this artificial intelligence community. And this was one of the first things I did with him, and this resulted in a conference paper in 2003 about Mode and Wii Mode cooperation. But at that time I learned about these ideas that economists had been developing, namely Robert Sugden and late Michael Bacharach. They had the idea of team reasoning, and they had been influenced by the collective intentionality people, including Raimo, and they tried to make it a little bit more precise and try to translate these ideas, these philosophical ideas, into game theoretical language. And especially Michael Bacharach's 1999 paper, Interactive Team Reasoning, was very important. I think I found the paper, but it was really Raimo who realized its importance, because he thought that there is a very interesting and very similar distinction that Bacharach had made to his own Mode Wii Mode distinction. And this, then he was later invited to a memorial conference or memorial workshop on Michael Bacharach's work in Trento, and then we gave a joint talk on these things, and then later we invited Kaarlo Miller to join us to write a proper journal paper on these topics, and this gave these two kinds of Wii reasoning. Yes. So Bacharach distinguished between two ways that group membership can affect people's decision making. And one was that they could adopt the group's preferences. There was some discussion on what these group's preferences are, but anyway, there was a intuitive idea that we could think that in addition to individuals, also group could have preferences. In the examples, it was usually just a very simple summation of or average of individuals' preferences, but the idea was more general, and the idea was that it wasn't supposed to necessarily be reductive to individuals' preferences. But the idea was that groups could have preferences of their own, and individuals can when they work for the group or work as group members, they can adopt the group's preferences and act on them instead of their personal preferences. But then there is an even stronger kind of a transformation. This first one was called preference transformation, but then in addition to this, they can adopt the perspective of the group agent. They can really think of their group as the agent that is trying to do something. And then this would give them a new perspective in a game theoretical situation. Instead of just thinking it as a single agent in a multi-agent situation, what should I do in this situation? given what everyone else is thinking and doing and intending, then we could think from the group agent's perspective, what should our group in this situation do? What would be the best action for the group? And once we get a solution to this problem, then it would be easy to infer for everyone individual, well, okay, in order to achieve that, what should I do? And Raimo realized that Bachrach's idea of group preferences and then this preference transformation and agency transformation roughly correspond to his pro-group I mode action and we mode action. And this pro-group I mode was his strongest version of I mode towards doing something for the group. So being a member of group and doing something to promote the group's goals. That still fell short of we mode, but was still very, very strong. And Bachrach in his paper had proved a central theorem. The solutions, that is the equilibria of these situations in which people only make these preference transformations, the solutions that from situations where agents do both preference transformation and agency transformation are a subset of those that result from those situations in which they only make the preference transformation. I will give you an example so that this becomes much clearer. So let's go further. This is the prisoner's dilemma that is very famous and very typical example in many social science and philosophical articles. And I'm not going to explain it, but you know it very well. There are two choices, cooperation and defection. And mutual defection is the rational thing to do. The yellow box here is the only Nash equilibrium in this game, and the Nash equilibrium, or an equilibrium in general, means that it's the outcome in which no one benefits by changing their strategy if everyone else keeps their strategies intact. So if you suppose that you are in this situation DD, then it doesn't make sense for you to unilaterally deviate and change from D to C, because then you will have less than you would in this situation. So that's what it means. It's an equilibrium state. No one should change their strategy in this. And the problem is in this prisoner's dilemma, as is well known, that even though the DD is the only Nash equilibrium, the only solution, the only rational thing to do in this game is to defect, everyone would be better off if they all cooperated, because then they would get 3 instead of 1 in this example. And people in situations that look like prisoner's dilemma end up cooperating easily, at least in experimental situations where these numbers represent something like monetary units or something like that. And economists, of course, realize that this means that these cannot be their proper utility numbers or proper preferences, but there had to be some kind of an social preference transformation or something that, when applied to this, would give the correct interaction situation as the participants themselves would see it. And one such transformation, the most cooperative one, was this kind of an average or some utility where everyone looks at everyone's utilities and then takes an average of them, and then the game is transformed into another game. And this now is a high-low, or it says some utility, but this is actually an average utility. So if people just, instead of these preferences that are depicted in the PD matrix, think in terms of these average utilities, group utilities, then the situation transforms into this high-low game in which the strategies are now labeled H and L, or high and low, instead of C and D. But anyway, the idea is that this is the same game, but now viewed after this transformation. And now we can see that there are two Nash equilibria, again, these yellow boxes here, either the one where both select high or the one where both select L. So this is a kind of a coordination game in which good things happen if the agents select the same alternative, but if there's a mismatch, if they fail to coordinate, then they will end up in these 0 boxes. Moreover, one of these equilibria is strictly better than the other, and intuitively, people usually, if they are put into a situation that looks like a high-low, they will end up selecting high. So they end up in this HH, this better equilibrium. And it may seem obvious, but Bacharach noticed that this is quite puzzling because game theory cannot really explain this. Because whenever there are several Nash equilibria, then all of them are kind of rationalizable. And you cannot really eliminate any of these Nash equilibria in the game, which means that usually, I mean, if you view agents as individualistic agents trying to maximize their utility or trying to do some best reply reasoning in this game, they cannot come to a determinate conclusion as to what to do in this situation. We try to illustrate this by some kind of practical reasoning syllogism. So this is a case where each of us thinks, what should I do? I intend to maximize group utility. You intend to maximize group utility. Well, if you select H, I maximize group utility by selecting H as well. But if you select L, I maximize group utility by selecting L. Because both are in this symmetric situation and no one knows what the other one will select, there is no way to reach a conclusion as to what to do in this situation. Next. However, yes, if we manage to take this group's perspective, thinking of the group as the agent, and we ask instead, what should we do? What should we do? What should our group do if the group were the agent that could choose? Well, it's easy to see because the group can select any of these outcomes because group has all of us as its members. So from the group's perspective, the best thing for the group would be to go high so that everyone selects high. And once we get this result, it's easy for anyone to infer that, okay, in this case, I should choose high. So the syllogism is that we intend to maximize group utility. We maximize group utility only if we choose HH. Therefore, we will choose HH. Therefore, I will choose H. And Bacharach's result that the equilibria coming from this kind of an reasoning or team reasoning is a subset of the previous. It can be intuitively explained by thinking of the group as an additional agent. So in the previous situation, we had two equilibria, H high, high and low, low, because they were just individual agents. No individual agents benefits from switching strategy because then they will get just 0 if the other one keeps the strategy intact. But now if we add an additional agent, the group agent, and think that, okay, let's consider the group agent still. There are these two equilibria in here, but let's see whether the group agent should change its strategy in any of these cases. Well, in high case, there is no way that the group agent would make its result better. However, in low, the group agent could change its strategy to high. So this is the intuitive idea behind this, this result of equilibria being a subset of the previous. Okay, Raimo was very enthusiastic about this result and thought that this is something that finally proves that Wii mode is irreducible to I mode, and actually it shows the necessity of group concepts in social scientific theorizing, because now that we think in terms of the group, if we can provably show that it leads people to behave differently. I mean, now this is a theoretical result, of course, so theoretical agents making practical reasoning, they behave differently in these situations, then it would be an important result. Of course, this also, now that it's connected to game theory, it's allowed in principle to formulating more precise testable predictions so that it could be really tested empirically what people do in different games. And there have been some psychological experiments that have tried to establish that people indeed sometimes reason. We also are planning to do something like this, but it never really was completed. Okay, and in Raimo's system, this we reasoning was an important element in the whole social ontology, because there is this kind of two levels, the levels of level of individuals, and then the level of social structures, groups, and so on. And there were two directions, there bottom-up direction and top-down direction, and the bottom-up direction was the creation of the collective social world by collective acceptance. We collectively accept that there are these groups and they have certain kinds of attitudes. And then the we reasoning was the top-down element, where we really, these social structures, social groups and social institutions, they affect our actions because they provide us reasons and they change our reasoning and they make us behave differently. So, and since they make us behave differently, it means that they have causal influence, which for Raimo meant that they are real entities in the world. So this was the significance of this we reasoning. Yes, okay, this was my part on this, but then we could say something about our future endeavors. I mean, in some, and actually in many ways, Raimo's work is still affecting our current projects, and Kaarlo and I are still, well, we have been working on this for years already. This nature of
gave many conference papers.
Yes, we gave many conference presentations on this, but we haven't published anything. We have a huge pile of different versions of paper, but we really think that there's a lacuna in this team reasoning literature, because no one has really nailed it down what these group preferences or collective preferences are. If they are supposed to be somehow irreducible to individual preferences, and they should somehow work in this team reasoning context, and this is really a big problem. I don't.
Yeah, they are just taken for granted and no idea where they come. And,
yes.
And in the games, as you said, you use averages or sums and so on. But our idea was to involve collective acceptance somehow in this structure, but it still awaits to be complete.
Yes. So then there is another field, this philosophy of AI and social robotics. Pekka and I, we now have a research group of our own, where we have gotten some funding for postdocs and PhD students, and we are really working on philosophy of AI and social robotics, but much of it is really influenced by this collective intentionality and Raimo's work and all that. For instance, one of the topics is, and we published in the Monist a paper on this, is responsibility of robots and AI agents, because we realized that there is some kind of an analogy, or actually there are both groups and AI agents and robots, they are all artificial agents in the sense that they are somehow constructed by individual human beings, either by this collective acceptance and collective construction of social world, or by concrete programming and building and all that. They are in some sense artificial, and maybe that affects their agency, at least moral agency and maybe autonomy, as we claim, that they are not really autonomous agents in the sense required by moral responsibility. Then we have another thing. Well, this is something that I published in a journal of social robotics. This is an idea of applying this team reasoning in human-robot interaction, because I thought that, well, okay, if it is the case, as Raimo thought and many others thought, and I think too, that people indeed sometimes team reason. If it is a mode of reasoning for us humans, and if we want to build robots that coordinate well with us, and team reasoning is a very good mechanism of coordination in cases where one of the coordination points is better than others. And this happens, of course, in human-robot interaction. Every time you have to give an object or receive an object, there are many points of coordination where our hands, the humans and robots' hand, may meet. And it makes a huge difference, at least for humans, but why not for robots as well, whether the coordination point is somewhere in 1.5 meters or somewhere just 10 centimeters above the ground. So the natural coordination point, if you can think of this as a high-low game where there's a huge number of different coordination points in the physical space in this diagonal, and some are better than others. And with team reasoning, it would be easy to find the one that is most suitable for both the robot and the human. So if humans use team reasoning to find the coordination points, and you could implement to robots similar kind of reasoning that finds the same coordination point, it would make the collaboration and coordination smoother. And then we have finally a third project where we try to use social robots as a facilitator in group processes. So for instance, in collective situations where a group tries to make a decision, sometimes there are conflicts and sometimes there are some other problems, but perhaps a robot that is acting as a facilitator somehow works and tries to get people to work in the Wii mode, might perhaps be able to make their group processes go smoother. So this is something that we are studying together with Johannes Seit in Aarhus.
Yeah, people from Aarhus and from Stockholm, and that project is in part in the spirit of Raimo's naturalism, because we are now engaged in designing an experiment on this Wii mode effect or factor in group processes, but it's turned out to be rather difficult task. But that's what we're working on.
To operationalize Wii mode into such into something that you can program in a robot, it's very difficult.
And then that was about how Raimo's work continues in our work, but perhaps there's much more important legacy that Raimo left, namely that as a founder of collective, at least one of the founders of collective intentionality and consequently social ontology. Of course, his work and inspiring books keep on living in the many research agendas of this social ontology community. So Raimo will definitely not be forgotten. And he's also frequently cited in many neighboring fields like primatology, for instance, and psychology and AI research. So Raimo really left a important legacy for the philosophical community. And then the conclusion perhaps is a bit strange term for this. But anyway, we want to end by saying that what we had was a wonderful journey with Raimo which started when we were young students, and we were sincerely scared of him because he had a reputation of being a harsh, no bullshit professor. But of course, over the years later on, we grew less scared of Raimo. And indeed, for many years, he was a very supportive, reliable, very good friend who we really can and truly respect, and whom we sincerely miss. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this impressive presentation. Now, this last emotion, of course, is probably difficult to pick up on from the side of the audience, but I'm sure there are many questions concerning how the projects you're engaged in relate to Raimo, how exactly the connection is, where you think the disagreements are. So the floor is open for questions. And since you specifically said you wanted questions and answers, let me try to break the ice with the following question. So, I mean, with the high-low, Raul, there's surprise. I checked recently, there's surprisingly little experimental work, and I'm now discussing with the lab at the University of Vienna of actually running highs and lows, you know, and then there's some qualitative research on it, you know, really asking people about their reasons and so on. But I wonder with Raimo, I mean, once I had a conversation with him about neuroscience, where he sort of seemed interested in people trying to find the Wii mode in the fMRI.
Yes.
Could you, and maybe also with primatology and all of these other fields. So Raimo is known, if you read the title, he wanted to provide the foundation. So foundation is a term that figures prominently in his philosophical outlook. And I think he stuck to it throughout his career. But did he, in how far was he involved in actual contacts with empirical science?
Well, I don't know very much about this fMRI. I think that Mike would probably tell more, but I know that they were planning to make some studies with these Finnish researchers. I think it was Riitta Hari, who was one of the people who was involved. Mike probably could say something about that. I can tell that we also we were planning to do some experiments that we were actually trying to replicate the experiments that Andrew Coleman had done. You probably are aware of those things, that he had the idea of designing different types of games in which people using different cooperative strategies, one of them being team reasoning, would choose differently. And then that is one of the standard references for those who think that there is some evidence that people actually team reason. But the problem is, of course, that it's it's underdetermined because of course there might be many other reasoning methods that lead to the same results as team reasoning. So our idea also was same as yours. How about replicating these experiments, but then in addition to just asking for their choices, ask for the reasons for their choices. And we actually ran some preliminary experiments with, goodness, now the name just, the German psychologist from Cologne who moved to Michigan, Gary Bente. Yeah, we ran some experiments we went to Cologne and discussed with them, and they actually made some first preliminary experiments where we got some initial data on this, where we really had people's responses as to why did you choose this? And well, the results in this was, certainly there were people saying something like, okay, well, this is a win-win situation, so why not? I mean, I go for this because it's best for all. And of course, this is very close to team reasoning or we reasoning, because the idea is here, okay, it's a win-win, so it's best for all. But of course, there wasn't a group. It wasn't really, it was best for each. So I wouldn't really say on the basis of this kinds of results yet that the Wii Mode theory is validated, but anyway, it was interesting, and we were excited to really run more proper tests like this. So I'm very interested in hearing what you will be doing in Vienna. So thanks for mentioning.
So,
Michael Schmid.
yes, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. I have a quite broad question, and I'm not sure that's the best place to ask it, but anyway, I'll ask it now. So I knew that Raimo was coming from a philosophy of science background, and actually this 1985 book, I think, is about science, reality, something. Yeah, you had it on the slide, but I can't think of the title. It's actually the first book of his that I ever came across. And that was also, it was interesting to learn, which I didn't know, that he had trained as a psychologist. What I would be curious to learn a bit more about would be what were his like philosophical influences. Yeah, so what was the kind of philosophy that he studied at that time? Who were his teachers? What kind of philosophers did he keep up with later in life? At a couple, I noticed in Mai's presentation, a few times she talked about internal realism. Of course, that's strongly associated with Putnam. So I don't know whether Putnam was an influence. So I would be curious about any information of this sort that you might have. And of course, I should also mention Sellers, because the notion of the Wii Mode comes from Sellers originally. So is it really true that Sellers had a big influence on Raimo, or yeah, just any thoughts would be appreciated.
Sellers' work had very strong influence. I mean, both Wii Mode and Wii Intention come from Sellers' writings, but I don't know how much.
They're very different. It's a moral notion by Sellers, but
yeah, that's true. That's true. But how much did they interact? I'm not really sure of that, because
not much.
Yeah,
I think they met once.
Yeah, they met once. I guess he was considering to go to Pittsburgh, but ended up going to Stanford instead, where he did work with Suppis.
Suppis, yes.
Yeah, but he one of his teachers was also Jaakko Hintikka. And his first book on theoretical concepts in '73, that's using model theoretical methods like bet definability theorems in model theory. It applies it to the analysis of theoretical concepts, and so that was Hintikka was, I think, one of his mentors. And he visited, I think, he did in Stanford, where Hintikka was a professor during the years later on. That's all I know. But about Sellers, yes, we used to say, I gave an examination as a student with Raimo, and I had to answer some questions about Sellers, and we were saying that he is sold, Raimo Tuomela is sold to Wilfried Sellers.
But that Suppis, I don't know really what exactly was the influence.
I would say that I wrote a joint article with Raimo in a volume, freshly volume dedicated to Pat Suppis, and I learned that Pat Suppis regarded Raimo as one of his pupils. And I think that Raimo Tuomela was a kind of Finnish counterpart of Pat Suppis. I mean, a true scientific philosopher.
Mm-hmm. So does that also mean that he was not so much influenced by, say, I don't know, Kant or Hegel, or that he hadn't? I mean, he must have read something like that in his youth, right? Or what did he think about Wittgenstein? Or I don't know. Did this kind of philosophy concern him at all?
Well, I'm rather skeptical about that.
Yes, but he read quite a lot, and now that we were cleaning up his office, I found this. I don't even remember from which university it was, but it was a course notes on a course on Immanuel Kant. Right. And I don't know, how much he had read other classics otherwise, but I think that he had done done quite a lot of reading, but for instance, about Hegel, he said that he was invited into a conference on Hegel, maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago. And then, well, he said that, yeah, Hegel is interesting, but I can't really, I mean, if you start studying Hegel, then you will have to spend 10 years of your life at least to get into at least a modest understanding. So he couldn't really sacrifice that much.
But I think he was influenced by Putnam's realism and science action and reality is a criticism of the myth of the given, and then as evolving towards a Putnamian position.
Yeah, but I would say that he probably has read most of the classic philosophers and their most important works, because he really did read a lot, and he had, for instance, he had read lots of continental philosophy, but he never published anything on that. But he was aware of much of that stuff too. So he definitely read a lot.
Yeah, German sociologist.
Yes.
So he gave me some book, but I don't remember it now.
Wojtek Zachnik and then Arto Laitinen.
Hello. I'm very sympathetic to the idea of team reasoning, and I was reading some literature before, but I am quite interested on your view how to build collective preferences out of collective acceptance, because I think there are some ideas before in Sagden. He tried to, I don't know, describe these mutual beneficial outcomes. And one tricky thing with building collective preferences is that sometimes if you use these summative or averaging views of preferences, then it leads to some individual sacrifices, right? So there might be different outcomes if you sum up or average these outcomes. Some individual may sacrifice, and the way how Sagden tries to tackle this obstacle is to specify certain threshold. What can individual reach or get just acting alone, and from the threshold you build some mutual beneficial outcomes. And I was just curious if the same idea applies to your account or your possible account of collective acceptance, or how would you propose such idea in a collective acceptance view of collective preferences? If you have some, it will be quite interesting point for me. Thank you.
Yes, this is a very good question. Sagden really, yes, nowadays this is how he thinks, but not in his earlier papers. I think he has a paper called, was it Team Preferences from 2000?
Yeah.
And there he kind of, what he says about team preferences is pretty much something like, well, team preference is whatever function they end up maximizing when they team reason. Yeah. So it was kind of saying something like, okay, well, it's a reveal in their team reasoning.
Yeah. That's what team reasoning gives you.
Yeah, so kind of a collective revealed preference idea. But later on, I think it was the 2013 paper where he was starting to think about in these terms, which are quite individualistic, because now it's the mutual benefit in relative to some reference point, which is something that they can gain alone. And this is, of course, something a very kind of typically, I mean, this is something that economists, of course, are interested in. I mean, something that, well, what does it give in addition to working alone? What does it add to being cooperative and engaging in team reasoning? This is a very good idea from that perspective, but it's also quite different from the collective acceptance ideas, because the collective acceptance idea really is that, okay, we collectively decide what is good for the group, and it doesn't really necessarily, it's not necessarily Pareto optimal or anything. I mean, it's not defined in terms of the individual preferences, and some people may make sacrifices and may have to make sacrifices, and they may willingly make sacrifices. I mean, it's something that if they collectively accept it, I mean, it's everyone's own choice to collectively accept something, but once you have collectively accepted it, then it becomes this, there is this reason or group reason or authoritative group reason even to act like this. But what it means, I mean, some people criticize this idea of team reasoning as irrational, because it, precisely for this reason, that it might advise people to act against their preferences.
Weyrich, for example.
Yeah, Paul Weyrich, for instance, states this critique. And here, I think that Kaarlo and I think slightly differently from Raimo, because Raimo thought that individuals can have both I mode preferences, and these are their usual preferences. And then they can have these Wii mode preferences, which are derived from the group's preferences. And this leads to the charge that, okay, if people act on their Wii mode preferences, it means acting against their I mode preferences, which are their own, all things considered, preferences. And so team reasoning is irrational, according to this criticism. But we thought that, okay, well, this is not the case.
Them both at the same time to
Yeah.
preference ranking. You take all things into account.
Exactly. So we take seriously the idea of a preference transformation. So when a person really identifies with the group, it means that he adopts the group's preferences as his all things considered preferences that determine his action. And whatever private motivations and reasons he has, he puts them aside, and they are not anymore a relevant concern in terms of his preferences.
So less so.
Yes. So when he considers things from the group's point of view, he really considers the things from the group's point of view and not from his private point of view. And hence his all things considered preferences are identical with the group's preferences in this ideal Wii mode case. So he's acting on his all things considered preferences, however, they are identical with the group's preferences. But still, and in this collective acceptance view, they are collectively accepted, or at least they follow from whatever has been collectively accepted. But the problem with this, I think we still struggle with this idea of collectively accepted or group preferences being based on something that is collectively accepted, because it kind of loses one of the original insights that the economists had, that people might sometimes cooperate spontaneously just based on their private preferences when there's enough commonality there. So they just kind of see that there is common interest. And this is perhaps something that also Sandu tries to capture in his newer writings, that they kind of see opportunities for cooperation and spontaneously start to team reason without there being any previous collective acceptance. So this is something, so it's very difficult to put both these ideas together in one notion of collective preferences. And this is the problem that we have struggled with this paper and haven't really published and maybe never will publish.
Okay, yeah, sorry, thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah, thanks.
So,
sorry, I didn't know this.
Yeah, so this was just a follow-up to the question that Michael asked earlier. I think Raimo was a professor in Jyväskylä sometimes in the early 70s for one year. And I think that was the time when he was co-editing the volume of the Foundations of the Philosophy of Social Sciences, which came out in the mid 70s with Ilkka Patoluoto, I think. And I heard from someone who was a student then in Jyväskylä when Raimo was the acting professor for 1 year, I suppose, that the students or the seminar that he gave was on Gadamer's Wahrheit und Methode. So he made the students read that was before it was translated into English. I guess those days it was more common that people could read German in Finland as well. But that was his, what he, as a professor in Jyväskylä, I guess he kind of knew by reputation that there are people interested in continental philosophy there, and he was interested in, different approaches to the philosophy of social sciences. So that was what he did there. it there as a professor. So this was just to add an anecdote from his early career. You might remember better which year it was. Sometimes in the 70s, I suppose.
Early 70s. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and was it the chair of the philosophy?
Sorry?
Did you have a professorship in philosophy in university?
Yeah, I suppose that was. Who was there? Was Hintikka there for 1 year as an acting professor? Who was there? And then Raimo was there for one year. It was before Reijo Vilenius then got elected there. So
that's a good tradition going from Gadamer to Rudolf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gabriel here has a question.
One question to your group is that I see you look for context with, I mean, you look at what economists do, and game theorists, and people in AI. One field which is missing, in my opinion, and probably deserves better attention, is legal reasoning. Because there is a lot of legal reasoning, which people think, I mean, some of the people I talk to, they think that the methodology of legal reasoning in Finland is individualist. And then there are cases discussed. Probably the methodology of the legal reasoning elsewhere is not individualistic, but I think it's worth looking at legal reasoning, because there's questions of responsibility, of course, which arise. And yes,
right, yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I mean, this is something to be studied. I haven't studied I have no background in legal studies, but Pekka studied.
I studied as a law student. And nowadays we do have contacts with legal researchers via the AI stuff, and we build more collaborative relations to legal school in Helsinki. We should do
very much.
Stuff.
Hi. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for everybody for such substantive and wide-ranging reminiscences and discussion of his views, of Tuomela's views. I guess I was just wondering, and I guess this goes back to the game theory aspect, and I have the sense, it was very clear in Bacharach that when to use Raimo's terminology, you switch between the Wii mode and the I mode. It's a brute psychological shift between those perspectives. But I get the sense that that's not, is that the way Raimo thought of it? And is that the way the people in Finland on your kind of research team think of it? Or do you feel that there's more that could be said to, in a sense, kind of rationalize the shift between the Wii mode and the I mode? I mean, it's always like once you're in the mode, it makes sense and there's a kind of rationality to it. But whether to kind of make that shift, whether that transition is going to be a brute psychological shift as Bacharach thought, or whether there's more reason behind it. I'm just wondering what the team's attitude is towards that, the Helsinki team, and what what Mai's attitude is towards that too. So anyway, that's just a question.
That is a very, very good question, and we don't have a collectively accepted view. I mean, I think that Kaarlo and I are quite much influenced by Bacharach's idea. It's kind of a Gestalt switch, and you can't really choose whether you are in the I mode or Wii mode. But Raimo did think that you can choose between I mode and Wii mode, and he kind of tried to persuade people to move from I mode and Wii mode. I think some of his arguments were pretty normative. I think said that it would be rational to move from I mode to Wii mode because it gives better results in some sense. But we thought, we were quite convinced actually by Elisabeth Pachery's very good argument where he constructed the second order prisoner's dilemma. Where, I mean, of course, by adopting the Wii mode, you could solve the prisoner's dilemma in some sense of solving. We never thought that you could really solve prisoner's dilemma because it was really a question of, well, once you are in prisoner's dilemma, there's no way out. You have to defect. But you could kind of, if you happen to have be in Wii mode,
ending up.
Yeah, you end up in yeah, you can't end up in a prisoner's dilemma because you match your values with the others and all that. But the thing is, I mean, Elisabeth Pachery had this argument that you can't really select rationally the Wii mode. Well, there was this second order prisoner's dilemma that you face, but the idea basically is that what is rational in a situation depends on the framing of the situation. And the selection of I mode between Wii mode is a framing decision. So what is rational depends on framing, so it cannot be a matter of rationality to select between different framings, right? So this is pretty much the idea. So, and we are quite influenced by this argument that you can't really select whether you, or there cannot be a rational argument for viewing things from the group's perspective versus from the individual's perspective, because what is rational depends on the perspective.
Yeah. And you can't do it just like that, but you can do it indirectly, that you collectively accept something, and then that will change you probably create some obligations or whatever, and that will change your things considered preferences and the frame. But you cannot just
but Raimo seemed to think that no, because decision making is really reasoning or practical reasoning, and you can choose which premises you take as reasons, as which things you take as premises in your reasoning. So if you decide to take as premises in your reasoning the group attitudes, so you decide to use these group reasons in your decision making instead of your individual reasons, then you can adopt the Wii mode. I don't know, I mean, for us, this was very difficult to understand because we thought that this there's only one set of preferences at the time. So and you can't really choose your preferences. You can't choose what your role is.
Preferences are the basis you choose from, but you can't.
Yes, exactly.
We are sort of running out of time.
Yeah, it's a real adventure to experience the Helsinki group in action here. Last comment from Arto.
Do we have time? Gabriel also has a talk still to go.
Now, just last point from Arto, and then we're going to take a little break, and there's going to be ample time for Gabriel.
Okay,
very good.
I'll be very short. So
I think it's fitting for this legacy of Raimo's to quote very recent exchange on that very question. Within this conference, there was a talk by Jon Pettersson and then question from the audience by Gunnar Björnsson, precisely concerning this, that whether it's just a Gestalt switch or whether you can choose for a reason. And the idea that was discussed there, that could it be that there's within a frame, sort of broadly speaking, there's a reason valid within that frame to go to the other frame, so that you could have in your I mode kind of reason to switch to the Wii mode, if that's like within your psychological powers to do, but that the problem isn't that there can't be a reason to do it, because you always choose within a frame. But if the reasons are within the frame, then that might be fine, so that you might have an I mode reason to switch to the Wii mode Wii mode framing, and then in the Wii mode framing you might have a reason to switch to the I mode.
Yeah, and this is an excellent cue, because this group has now a Wii mode reason to disband as a group and take 10 minutes break and reconvene in 10 minutes. Let's put it in practice and meet again in 10 minutes.
Saved by the bell.
Thanks.
All right, our break is up. Let's continue with the next talk. And it's by Gabriel Sandu, an old friend of Raimo's, now very distinguished professor of philosophy at the University of Helsinki, mostly working in the philosophy of language and logic. Gabriel, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Bernhard and Sava, for organizing this. It's a way to pay tribute to the memory of this great man who Raimo was. And I worked, before Raimo, I worked for many years with Jaakko Hintikka. And well, we worked in game theoretical semantics and in foundations of mathematics. But then at some point, when I was unemployed, and Raimo employed me in his project, and he was, although I worked for as in his research group at that time, I worked only for less than 2 years. I was extremely impressed by him, by his generosity, by his supportive attitude, but also by his scientific attitude. And then, well, I was a working logician at that time, and my task was to make precise, what we called in an article with Raimo, to make precise the analysis of joint actions and intentions. It's, you can put the first slide, Pekka.
It's this one.
Yeah, so let's go, let's move. I'll be short. Many of the things which I intended to say have been covered here, and many other things have become a little bit in the light of the discussion, have become a little bit irrelevant. So in my opinion, so these are examples of joint actions. In my opinion, that what is truly specific, so I understood him, what was truly specific about Raimo's conception was what is the glue which makes an action social is the intentional element, the we intention. And I was in the project that stage with Kaarlo, where the emphasis on we intentions and less on the we mode. So let's move to the next. So an important component of a joint action was a joint intention. What a joint intention has two aspects. And one aspect is the we intention part we have learned, and the A and B joint intend to C to E that X. And the other, this is the aim intention. And the other part, the other aspect was the action intention, the participation intention. Each agent intend to do his part. I spent the 2 years in Raimo's project in trying to understand this, and which was a very challenging, task. And yes, let's move on. Let's move on. Yes. So we know that our intention came with a rationality constraint that has been underlined by several people here. You cannot. We intend to do X unless you believe that not only that you can perform your part, but also that the other ones perform their part. And the formation of a joint intention takes usually the form of a plan, blah, blah, blah. That enough has been said on this. And let's, and that was the challenging part. To understand the relation, as it turned out several times in this discussion, to understand the relation between the we intention and the action intentions, and to spell it out, to create a logical framework to do that. So each member of the group forms a we intention. He says, we will do X together. And this is just an intention to realize, to bring about a certain state of affairs, X, a certain goal, which may exceed the agent part. And the other one was the action intention, is an agent intention to perform his part. And that was, yes, so let's go forward. Yes. And then he used this bulletin board view very often. One of us comes up with the idea of cleaning the park. that person may publicly communicate this to other group members, and the initiating members or organizer proposal can be sought to be written on a public bulletin board. And then the members of the group, there is an announcement, the members of the group G will clean the park next Saturday. Those who will participate, please sign up here. As a result of that, I understand that the participant formed the joint intention. The joint intention to participate in joint, as I said already, this, and as is well known, this has two aspects. Each signed participant forms a we intention to clean the park. We will clean, each of them will say, we'll clean the park. But then each sign up participant forms an action intention to carry out his part or share of the cleaning part, while he's part of it. So I wouldn't say problems with Tuomela. This is the two strong terms. Well, in my Tuomela's talk, she spoke about attention. I don't know if she finally saw there is attention, but there is this, she called it weekly collective and individualistic. I try to understand this tension. On one side, we have a philosophical problem. The content X of we intention may contain more than what the agent can bring about. Is it realistic to posit such an intention? Where you have criticised by several people, philosophers, Miller is one of them. But then there is also a logical problem, because this kind of, there is a practical syllogism, and that came out very clearly in Kaarlo Miller's talk. And that is an agent having the we intention that the goal is realized entails his action intention to perform this part. So in the last question before this session, somebody asked the question, what is it a Gestalt switch, or is it this, is it psychological? But that is actually also very strong in Raimo's work, that there is a logical entailment between the we intention, the content of the we intention, or I don't know how to say, between an agent endorsing an we intention, and then his endorsing or forming an action intention. That's the nature of the practical syllogism, which was very puzzling to me. And that is the practical syllogism, which was already illustrated in Kaarlo Miller's talk. Each participant agent makes or supports or subscribes to the following inference. The agent say, or I say, we'll do X. That's the intention. And therefore, I'll do my share of X. So perhaps that is, I interpret Raimo a little bit too unhumorously and a little bit too scholastically, but this is something I try to understand. The inference is from premise 1 to the conclusion 2 introduces a kind of tension, and I think that is what probably Mai tried to illustrate in her talk, that is not quite actually so. There are many passages in Raimo work where she stated, but my question was, how can you combine a kind of non-reductive, non-individualistic interpretation of will do X, I take Raimo to have endorsed such a conception, with the individualistic nature of I will do my part of X. I mean, how can you have a logical entailment between these two kinds of notions, and so that one entails the other? And yes, and I think that Raimo's solution to that, I don't know if he thought of it as a solution, but that came up in his paper with Kaarlo Miller in '88. And let us go back. In Kaarlo Miller's presentation of the practical syllogism is even before that. There is also another premise, we'll do X, and there was another premise, I am one of the group G, therefore I will do my share of X. Now let's go back. So So Raimo's solution, of course, that is from his paper. In his paper with Kaarlo in 88, basically he defines, he analyzes the agent intention, the we intention, in the following way. That is basically the same, essentially the same definition that he gives 15 years after that in his paper in Philosophical Studies in 2003, We Intention Revisited. And at the end, he defines the we intention in the following way. The agent AI intends to do his part of X. So you have a definition. The agent AI has the we intention if and only if he intends to do his part of X as his part of X. And then there are the clauses about mutual beliefs and all that. But as you see from the first, from the definition, I mean, he defines the we intention in terms of individual intention, in terms of his participant action intention. And I think that if you have such a definition, so if you have the intention entails, logical entails the action intention, the individual intention, then of course the practical syllogism is validated. But then is validated in a way which is for me not strong enough or not substantial enough, or is just validated by definition. So on the analysis, and how can such a non-reductive or weakly collective concept entail an individual one from a logical point of view? I don't think it's an impossibility, but I was just thinking of analogous results, like you have mutual beliefs defined, as you know, in terms of an infinity of embedded beliefs entails an individual belief. But then, of course, there you have a reductive methodology, because the mutual beliefs, the common belief, so common knowledge, common belief. The common knowledge is defined sort of atomistically, individually. And so I was striving to give some formal implementation in order to understand that. So there were two formal implementation I know of. One was by me and Tuomela with Raimo, joint action on group action made precise in '96, a paper in Synthèse. And the other one was by a well-known philosopher of science, Wolfgang Balzer, and Tuomela, Collective Intention and the Maintenance of Social Practices in 2003. And so I'll start with we try to do that. What's the point of doing that? Well, Raimo, as it came up, was a very open-minded man. I mean, he was looking, we were reading lots of papers at that time in AI, in distributed artificial intelligence by Raul and Georgiev, by Cohen and Levesque, and we wanted to have an interaction with these people. And then it was naturally, you see, Helsinki, which is Jaakko Hintika's place, home place, it was naturally to break up this happy marriage between logic and mathematics, and to extend it to intentional attitudes, to propositional attitudes. And that was actually the case also in the AI community at that time, after seminal work done by several people, Harper and other. So the formal language that were devised in these papers usually had two parts. One part was the specification of the joint actions out of the individual parts. So what is the structure of a joint actions, collective action in terms of individual parts? And the other part was, which was crucial, was to specify this we intentions part and the relation between intentions and individual intention. And that was done in the framework of the belief, desire, intention, the BDI part. And indeed the challenges were how to represent the whole part relations. R performs, for instance, R performs Y as his part of X. And then how to represent we intentions so that the practical syllogism is valid. I mean, the practical syllogism, which is the inference from the we intention to the individual intentions. And in the Balzer Tuomela 2003 paper, I rather say a few words about that. The whole power relation, we start with a set of primitive actions, individual actions, and then you form, these actions can be performed conjunctively, disjunctively, in parallel, or sequentially. You can see here clear inspiration from the dynamic logic approach. And then a collective action is such a combination of individual actions, and the social practice is a sequence of such combinations governed by an explicit plan. And in my approach with Raimo in the OTC's paper, we had similar kind of ideas, but operating now in model logic, starting also from basic actions, individual actions, the agent alpha brings about P, and then also combining this in parallel or sequentially or conjunctively or disjunctively. Not a very happy idea, I'll say now, because we had you have propositional symbols and then to form conjunctions and not conjunctions but parallelly combined actions and sequentially combined actions. I'm not sure that we were completely coherent here, but then we try to formalize this, to introduce and to explain these parts of the joint action P, and we represented parts by subformulas of P. So for instance, Q here is alpha's part of P. And well, some conclusions about this formalization of action. In Balzer and Tuomela, there are no parts explicitly attributed to the agents. Well, we try to introduce part in my paper with Tuomela, parts are represented by subformula, but in both cases, there is no formal specification of the notion of a plan, because which is so important for forming intention. And then there is a crucial question. Do these operators borrow from dynamic logic, you see, especially the conjunction, conjunction and disjunction are borrowed from logic, but then doing an action in parallel and sequential, do they host collective actions and social practices? And I just think about the examples started from was carrying the piano upstairs, and I don't know, playing a piece of music together and all that. So there's just the beginning of the work. And then the BDI part, well, in Balzer and Tuomela's paper in 2003, you have notions in the syntax like a time T, the agent I, in group G, well, the group is not indexed here, represented here, has the individual intention to perform the action A. Also have similar individual beliefs, but then the joint intention, time T, the agent in the group G, share the collective intention to perform action. That is defined in terms of individual beliefs and over individual intention. So you see here the same tendency, just a moment, but the same tendency as I try to explain in the tension that I had on the practical syllogism, that you can have this, you can validate the practical syllogism, but you can validate it with a price. I mean, just by defining the collective notion, the we intentions. Actually, there is no proper analysis of we intention here, but just defining it in terms of individual intentions, in just to get the logical intent of work. And yes, and so again in my Balzer and Tuomela, the semantics, you see, well, that was inspired from probably also from dynamic logic, because it represents basic actions. It interprets them as kind of transition systems. For instance, if we have the joint parallel action of Mary and John are driving toward together, that is or consists of, will be interpreted by a pair of states, C and E, and each state is a set of propositions. Where in C you see the sentences, John is at home, Mary is at home, it is 7 o'clock, John enters the car, Mary enters the car, and then you end up with a state E, which includes John is in his office and Mary is in our office. So this is a joint action. But as you see, there's also a very strong reductive element in a sense, I mean, to individual actions. And so the methodology is basically reductive, I would say, and there is no proper analysis of intentions. And the formula, in the formula I mentioned about capture only that intention. But of course, the authors are aware, Raimo and Baltzar, they say that there is a Wii mode that requires much more. And it requires the formation of this Wii intention. But how to model that kind of logically is still an open issue, I assume. And if we move forward, and the same, we try to do, I would say, to try to do differently this, so to implement the intentions, and then that's why with Raimo in the paper, and then we try to incorporate this in the syntax notions like alpha. These are individual intention. Alpha we intends P. That is not. This is a we intention. Sorry, and that will be a kind of we intentions. Will do P, and then also individual intentions. Alpha intends to do Q assist part of P. So we try to capture also this part-whole relation, and then the joint intention is just each member in the collective just says the we intention. They say the intention. So, but the part 3, the joint intention, is just defined in terms of the we intentions that I mentioned. So if I have an example of a joint action, alpha 1 and alpha 2 jointly bring about that P1 in parallel with P2, that is defined in terms of alpha 1 and alpha 2 bringing about P1 and P2 in parallel. And then you add the joint intention element, which is finally analyzed in terms of we intention. But now the relation between the we intention, let's move Pekka, is we just obtain when we operate in some kind of joint agent trees. And the inspiration came from Bernhard, from Perloff, representations of actions. And they represent then we intentions like between T and T prime. Alpha has the we intention that P holds at P prime. And then we also have, that is supposed to represent this is the we intention. Then we have also another notion on the trees, which are subtrees, which assigns action intention to the individual agents, as you see here. But then there is not necessarily an entailment between the intention and the individual action intention, but then that will be ensured by some kind of constraints on the trees in on the semantical trees. Like for instance, we have this movie. Yes, let's move. We have this, for instance, the syllogism is rendered valid by appropriate constraints. So if P is alpha's we intention at time T, and the intention is that it holds between T prime and it holds at T second, and Q is alpha's part of P, then also Q is alpha's part of P, is we intended. I mean, no, I'm sorry. Then the part, the agent alpha intends Q assist part, and things like that. So this is very exciting. I don't know. We didn't find some other way to do that. It's enough. All right. And but that was, you see, that was very exciting times, and that reflects the difficulty of the task. And I think that there is place for much improvement here. I take this relation between the we intention, the practical seriously, and the individual intention to do his part. Because somebody asked, "What is this, a Gestalt switch?" But that's illustrate another way in which earlier Tuomela also thought about this. It was called the relation of logical entailment, and there were this way endeavors to make precise all this in a logical framework. Once again, I mean, in order to conclude all this, because I'm the last speaker, I'm really truly grateful to have known Raimo Tuomela and to have enjoyed his scholarship and his truly generous attitude. And I am very thankful to my colleagues, but also to the organizers, in particular to Sandu and Bernhard, for organizing and paying tribute to his memory. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gabriel Sandu, for an excellent contribution for opening the hood on, the technicalities involved in setting up Raimo's account, but also maybe in moving beyond it. Are there any questions, comments? Maybe I can start with a very general point. So this is all prior intention, right? This is distal intention. Were you with Raimo ever thinking about, more along Enscombian lines, thinking of intentionality primarily in terms of what's going on while you act, while you're at it? Because this is, so far, this is all planned, right? This is prior intention. But the object of prior intention, of course, is intention in action, right? What you plan to do is doing. So what about this this other side, and maybe some authors say more important side of intentionality, where it's effective, where it's in action? Was this ever a discussion between you?
Not between. Listen, I was a very old-fashioned action theorist, reading mainly papers on the logic of action, and there were papers by von Richt and by Christian Segerberg, and hearing this kind of sequences of intentions and ending up with, finally with an intention which prompts, is effective in prompting the action, and that was all we did. And no, I'm sorry to just give a dull answer. We never considered that. We should, but we did not.
That's still very enlightening. Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Bernhard. Just following up on this, I can report that I once had a conversation with Raimo specifically about joint attention, or I tried to push this on him a little bit, this idea of joint attention and understanding joint attention in terms of non-conceptual content. And I would say he wasn't actively hostile to it, but it seemed, I would confirm what was said, that he didn't seem, it was a bit probably unusual to him, or that wasn't a term that he thought about things. So I'd say I had this feeling that he was more like an, if I may so put it, like old school linguistic turn sort of philosopher who thinks about things in terms of propositional and conceptual content. And he hadn't really thought about joint attention or joint action in the sense of the idea that there might be these like more online representations which cannot be accounted for in terms of prior intention. I think he didn't really think about it as far as I can tell.
But of course, you still need to get the propositional stuff right. So, and also sure, he left work for others to do.
Yeah.
That's in no way demeaning the work of Raimo. Maybe another point. Gabriel, you use this distinction between we intention and action intention. But surely we intention is an action intention, right? If we intend, we want to do something. Is this just the collective level versus the individual level, or has this a deeper meaning in the way you phrase this?
In the way I phrase it, I just interpreted that this is an intention to see a certain state be realized. And I think that there are passages in Raimo's work, especially in this paper in 2003 in Philosophical Studies, where he sees it that way, that I intend, the content of my intention is that, I mean, the window is open, or that the game is won. And then that is a state that is supposed to be brought about and also intended to obtain. And that will be, which of course with realization exceed the individual part, but the individual parts, the intention in action will be just the individual intention. So this is how I interpret it at that stage.
Yes. Use the term aim intention.
Yes, aim, that's why he calls it aim intention. Probably he should have done a distinction between aims or goals and Yes, I don't know. Yes.
And a general intention to see to it that state obtains.
That's why I represent it also by some propositional ethics. I mean, it's a propositional attitude. Yeah. And that was how you see there was a tradition in Helsinki because Hintikka came to extend his logic because Hintikka worked with for Richt on constituents and the predicate logic. And then he came to extend logic to propositional attitudes, to cognitive attitudes. So Hintikka was a man who extended logic to cognition. But then he did that, as he confesses, after attending the lectures of Elisabeth Askamp on intentionality. And that was, you see, the locutions like, I wish that, I intend that, were analyzed. And then Hintikka came up with the idea, and then Ilkka Niilo also wrote papers on logic of imagination, logic of that. So the northern countries have become the promised land of all these weird logics, which are, you see, the logic of intentional, logic of belief, imagination, and all that, which found an application in our AI and distributed artificial intelligence later on.
Perhaps I could add that this distinction between the aim intention, the intending that, and the to intention, since we were talking about Sellers earlier, that's also already in Sellers, and actually he discusses that exactly in the context of intentionality. Yeah, so I think that's also.
Yeah, I was ignorant of this. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, no, it is in that early paper.
Yeah, but he discusses it in the way that ultimately propositional intentions have to be able to be translated into action referential terms. So this is a very strong point that I always make against because it's really clear in Sellers, and I think it's actually, by the way, it's not Sellers, it's in Collingwood already. Sellers source. He also has this distinction, intention that, intention to, and says that basically intention to is basic. So every intention that is then spelled out, just the intention to make it the case that. So that ultimately we need, intention in brief is action referential. And because it's action referential, it's action self-referential, because you cannot intend another person's action. And that's the big thing against these content accounts.
It's too bad that Kirk's not here anymore. Yeah. But
you're right. Okay, we're in the middle of hot controversies, and this is all sparked by Gabriel's contribution. We need to get back to these issues and have a strong branch in social ontology that's devoted to these core conceptions of collective intentionality. Unfortunately, our time is almost up. I had something prepared on Raimo as a practitioner of the Wii mode, but there's simply no time for this now. Let me just conclude by maybe saying the following. There was one thing that puzzled me about Raimo's practice that I couldn't imagine having read his work. And that was being accepted as a co-worker, as a partner in a joint venture, even though Raimo knew very well that my conception of philosophy was very vague, and the little bit of clarity it had was very different from his idea. And I think this is a conceptual problem. How can we do something together and do it intentionally so under individually different conceptions thereof? Put bluntly, I do not think Raimo's conception allows for this possibility, but he could do it in practice. And I think if we move forward in establishing social ontology, based on Raimo's initiative, this is something we should bear in mind, that we're sort of working together, even though we know very well that we're quite diverse and maybe even incompatible in our conceptions of what it is we're doing together. This is a success model. Raimo always advocated for an inclusive way of setting this up, but he also, and these are 2 points that I would like to mention, even though I'm not entirely sure what to make of them. One is this focus on shared intentionality. I think we should keep this present. And the other point is a bit of a difficult political issue. So Raimo thought that the European presence in this movement really matters. And I can only speculate about the reasons. I think it has something to do with his view of the European government-funded university system, that this is something he really valued and something in which he spent his whole life. And let me put it personally, I started to invite all these US Americans to my conferences and so on. And Raimo always said, well, let's keep a balance. He was present in the US, he studied in the US and he liked the US, but geography in his mind mattered a little bit. And I'm not sure what to make of it. I think, and I hope Raimo would agree that social ontology should become global. And by the way, for about half an hour of this symposium, we had Zhu Xu present in our conference here. And he was the one who led Raimo around Beijing about 20 years ago. And so there are contacts most everywhere in the world. So just this keyword, geography matters. And let's try to make this a truly global community that's diverse, that has a sense of being in cooperation while acknowledging that our conceptions might be very different. Raimo had this sense that with what he did, with what he was up to, he would sort of make a change in social philosophy, in social science. He had this a bit foundational idea, and I was never convinced it actually worked, because the social scientists I know, they're quite happy without foundations and sometimes quite productive. So philosophy sometimes, sometimes we are getting our tasks from the scientists rather than the other way around. But so he had this strong vision that there was something going on with this whole idea of re-intention. By the way, some people have picked it up, especially in the circle of Jürgen Habermas. They realized, well, actually, there's a way of sort of thinking ontologically in the social domain that's not tied to lingualism. And I sort of picked up on this a little bit. I apologize, I'm rambling. I just wanted to say meeting Raimo meant a lot for me and my career, and I know very well that he actively supported me, even though I had these other ideas in my mind and also the criticism of his works. I enjoyed meeting with the group in Helsinki very much indeed on several occasions, and I know from many colleagues that they made the same experience with Raimo and with his research group. I think we should keep Raimo's memory alive and find forms for this, and convene on some other occasion and think together about how to commemorate Raimo's work in an adequate way. For today, our time is up. I want to wish the contributors, I want to say them my thanks. These were really enlightening contributions. Thank you very much. Thanks to all the participants who have stayed with us for so long. And good night to those in Europe, and have a wonderful afternoon to those in the US.
Thank you, Bernhard.
Thank you, Bernhard.
For organizing the whole thing, taking the initiative. It was a very beautiful occasion. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you from me too.
Mai, it was very nice to see you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.